The fountain pen, like the finest pen of inspiration, glided softly across the smooth surface of the paper, leaving behind graceful strokes of fresh ink and weaving line after line the birth of a new story, filled with a miracle that smelled of night jasmine. As soon as the golden beam touched the spires of the castle, the courtiers whispered about the duke's youngest daughter, Rosetta Carcel, a pale but fiery red-haired girl with transparent blue eyes and a fox-like smile, born in the mysterious Forbidden Lands. Rosetta's character burned like a forge on a stormy night. Whenever she wished for something, the world would bend under her whim, and anyone who dared to refuse would face a hurricane of rage that would destroy plans, destinies, and even stone walls until she got her way. She stood in the luxurious hall, her arms folded across her chest in a graceful gesture, her gaze fixed on the distance, but deep down she dreamed more than anything else of meeting the Prince Charming of their kingdom, so that fate would finally smile upon her favorably. His name was Sihael von Idris, a descendant of royal blood, a youth with dazzling white hair and features carved from marble, whose appearance drove noble women crazy and inspired awe in everyone who looked upon him. At the brilliant reception, amid the bustle of noble lords and affected ladies, she stood like a statue, not taking her eyes off the only one who occupied her thoughts, her lover, whose presence in her heart kindled the fire of great desire. But few knew that Sihael von Idris himself was more than just a prince. He was the heir to an ancient and powerful artifact known as the Heart of the Earth, a glowing stone that was said to contain the power of nature itself. This young man was the victim of an ancient and sinister curse which caused him to lose his human form every full moon and transform into a wild wolf, a terrifying creature born of night longing, animal fury, and moonlight, merciless and indomitable as nature itself. This beast with fury in its eyes and a heavy iron collar, like a symbol of damned greatness, towered in the darkness. Its thick white fur sparkled in the moonlight, and its gaze, full of wild threat and primal pain, pierced the night silence, causing horror even in the bravest. Rosetta Carcel, young, bold, and possessing an unbending will, felt no fear of this creature. On the contrary, she cherished the dream of taming the beast, becoming the mistress of the damned creature and subordinating its will to her own, as if taming the storm contained in the heart of a werewolf. Her desire to become the prince's lawful wife was not born out of a desire for glory, grandeur, or high status. All Rosetta passionately craved was to be near him precisely because he was a cursed monster, a creature on the border of light and darkness whom she wanted to make her own. As his lawful wife, Rosetta could have taken complete possession of the prince, gained power over his damned heart, wrapped his wild strength in the shackles of love, passion, and submission, holding him on a thin but strong leash, like a trainer holds a wild beast. The hand that rested on the handsome young man's shoulder was a woman's, graceful, warm, trembling, encouraging, and he involuntarily glanced at her because his heart already belonged to another, the one whose name was an oath and whose love was an anchor in the storm of fate, pain, and curse. Wolves, by their true nature, are loyal and unbreakable creatures. They choose a mate once, following her until the end of their days, without changing their feelings, even if fate throws them into the abyss of darkness, despair, and cruel trials. Rosetta Carcel stood aside, holding back her trembling anger, despair, and angry jealousy, seeing how the man she desired with all her soul had gone to another, not to her, not to the one who was ready to share the burden of the beast with him, but to his only one, and the thought of this burned her eyes with pain. And so, tired of watching her dream go to another, Rosetta Carcel decided to give up love and virtue. She decided to take a dark, sinister path, becoming evil, cunning, and determined, in order to force the young man to come to her himself, conquered. Deep down, she knew that if she couldn't win him with her heart, she would win him with her mind. And so she decided to manipulate him like a puppeteer with his creation, imperceptibly drawing the young man into a web of enchantment in which he would become a toy in her exquisite hands. He was to become her puppet, a silent participant in a great drama in which she was the director, actress, and goddess, controlling his every movement, word, and even look until he forgot who he was and became whoever she wanted. In her icy and cold hand, sharp scissors suddenly sparkled, like a symbol of the merciless destruction of her old, vulnerable self, while her bright, fiery red hair fell serenely to the floor, a silent testimony of a profound rebirth, because the old Rosetta had disappeared forever. In a whirlwind of mad passion, jealousy, and obsession, the lady mercilessly drove the young man into a tight corner, like a cunning hunter catching his prey, and tightly wrapping her arms around him, pressed herself so tightly that she did not leave him a chance for salvation for a moment, squeezing a ring woven from despair, mad love. She was literally obsessed with this young man to the point of madness. Her feelings had long gone beyond simple love and turned into a painful, obsessive idea. Rosetta did not let him go for a single step, squeezing him in her arms so tightly, as if he was her last chance to breathe and the meaning of life itself. The lady, once graceful and proud, had turned into a true villain from the darkest legends. Her scarlet hair, like rivers of blood, blazed with madness, and her eyes burned with a thirst for destruction, leaving behind chaos and flames that could neither be stopped nor forgotten. In the end, when patience ran out, Sihael von Idris, the heir of light and justice, was forced to raise his sword to end the bitterness and pain, to stop Rosetta, the woman he once loved with all his heart, but who lost her mind and became a threat to everything. She did not resist, but met his gaze with a sad, almost peaceful smile, as if she had accepted her fate and acknowledged the mistakes that had brought her to this moment, and, with a quiet sigh and a slight smile, allowed death to take her into the cold embrace of darkness and oblivion. Her scarlet, flame-like hair fell into delicate strands, flowing down along with the thick, dark blood that slowly trickled down her pale skin, leaving traces of tragedy and bitterness in every drop, like a living memory of death. The woman's hand carefully reached out to the lady, who was sitting with her head down, as if trying to understand whether she was still alive and in what state her tormented soul was, shrouded in darkness and despair. Rosetta, meeting her reflection in an antique mirror, realized the terrible truth. She was trapped in the body of a villain from a novel whose fate was predetermined, and now she faced an agonizing choice: which path to choose to try to change her fate. Despite all her efforts, inevitability threatened to lead her to the same terrible denouement as the heroine of the book, to a merciless and painful death at the point of a sword, which became the inevitable result of the damned path. She was overcome by a strange and deep curiosity, why exactly she was trapped in the body of that ill-fated girl and not in someone else's, because fate could have distributed the roles differently, but it was she who had to go through this mysterious and terrible transition into a new reality. It all started with a sudden and brutal blow from a car that turned her life upside down like a powerful whirlwind, carrying her into a new, alien, and incomprehensible world where the usual rules no longer applied, and every moment was filled with unknown uncertainty and all-consuming fear. The girl froze, her eyes wide open in silent horror and confusion, realizing her imminent death and accepting her inevitable death. Her short haircut and dark eyes reflected inner chaos, pain, and despair, causing the heart to squeeze with pain and a deep sense of confusion. The blood slowly spread across the cold, hard asphalt, forming dark, sticky, and ominous stains, like a bloody trail that would forever leave an imprint of the tragedy and become a symbol of that fateful and inevitable moment when life and death met on the thin edge of extinction. The noblewoman clenched her hand into a tight fist in front of her, examining it carefully. There was not the slightest scratch or mark on her new body, as if fate itself was carefully preserving it, preparing it for the coming trials and battles that were inevitably approaching. She carefully tucked the bright, fiery red strands behind her ear, emphasizing the elegance and fragile grace that contrasted with the inner strength and determination hidden behind a cold look and calm, like a mask over real feelings. Rosetta was a truly beautiful woman. Her snow-white skin seemed to glow from within, and her hair, the color of a delicate rose, softly framed her thin, graceful features, creating the image of a refined, mysterious, and at the same time, strong lady worthy of admiration. The agitated maids, overcome with anxiety and fear, awaited with horror the reaction of their mistress, an evil and insidious woman who suddenly became quieter and more attentive, staring into the mirror, as if looking for answers to the questions that tormented her in her own reflection, internally struggling with her new fate. With a sigh of slight satisfaction and hidden joy, the lady quietly said that she liked everything, and with a gentle but firm permission, she allowed the servants to continue skillfully braiding her hair, giving it even more grace and sophistication. Slowly and carefully, as if weaving into the very fabric of time, the red strands were gathered into an elegant braid that emphasized the nobility and refined taste of the owner, giving her appearance a unique charm and mystery, causing admiration among those around her. Previously, the girl's life was ideal and cloudless. Before those fateful events of the book, she was born into a noble family, as if with a golden spoon in her mouth, surrounded by attention, luxury, and care, unaware of the trials that fate had prepared for her. The noblewoman sat down on the table, rested her elbows on it, and stared forward, plunging into deep memories of the events of the novella, which one after another surfaced in her memory, making her heart beat faster and causing mixed feelings of anxiety and nostalgia. The book began with the main character Lillian carefully and tenderly removing the temporary veil from the prince, revealing to him a face that would soon completely change his entire destiny and awaken new, powerful feelings in his heart that could forever turn the familiar world upside down. It was at this fateful moment that Sihael von Idris first felt the acute sense that he had met his true soulmate, subtly sensed a deep connection that could not be broken, and fell madly in love with the graceful and beautiful girl whose beauty captivated his heart forever. However, Rosetta could not forgive and accept the fatal fact that her lover was paying attention to another lady, a charming blonde, causing in her a storm of deep indignation, jealousy, and mental pain, which slowly but surely grew, turning into a flame of furious anger. Jealousy, malice, and all-consuming anger flared up inside her like a cruel storm, engulfing all her thoughts and feelings, and Rosetta's eyes filled with a bloody hue, reflecting her painful inner experiences and readiness to do anything to preserve a bitter and painful love. A lone wolf howled piercingly at the bright moon, illuminating the mysterious night sky, creating an atmosphere of mystery and sadness that seemed to penetrate into the very depths of the soul and fill the space around with a special magical sound. In the rich room, filled with exquisite furniture, an elegant table, comfortable chairs, soft armchairs, and shelves with countless books, there was an atmosphere of comfort and nobility that at the same time delighted and a little frightened with its magnificence. Rosetta, stunned by the sudden luxury of the interior surrounding her, stood in mute amazement, unable to believe that such splendor would now become an integral part of her destiny when she was asked if she was satisfied with this room, so unusual from the life to which she was accustomed. Her sweet brother, with bright red hair, like fire, a slight smile on his face, and confidence and calmness in his gestures, pointed his hand at a huge white wolf languishing in a massive cage, and calmly said that this was a gift for her, a symbol of strength, devotion, and faithful protection. She took a slow and confident step forward, and the light but distinct sound of her shoe echoed in the spacious room, filling the air with a tense atmosphere, as if a harbinger of impending, fateful changes and an inevitable meeting. In complete and utter shock, the lady suddenly realized that before her stood the very same damned prince from the book, that legendary and sinister figure that she had seen so many times in her thoughts, dreams, and nightmares, now vividly embodied in her reality with frightening accuracy. Sihael von Idris, as if from the darkness of darkness itself, assumed the terrifying form of an evil and ferocious wolf, grinning at her, his bright golden eyes sparkling with furious, uncontrollable anger and a cold, piercing fury that seemed to penetrate into the very soul, instilling deep and paralyzing fear. Sweat appeared on the girl's pale face, as if an echo of her inner excitement and terrible horror, and her lips involuntarily frowned, reflecting a state of anxiety and awareness that she was facing not just an enemy, but a real danger that could change her fate forever. Rosetta sank down wearily and lifelessly onto the soft, enveloping gray sofa, her head hanging heavily down, as if her whole spirit was depressed and exhausted, and her thoughts were constantly tangled in a mess of experiences, worries, and deep inner bitterness, finding no peace even for a moment. In her trembling hand lay a prickly, sharp object, skillfully tied with a bright red ribbon. This unusual and symbolic gift was presented to her by her brother, representing protection, strength, and a warning that the path ahead would be difficult and full of trials. She clutched the prickly object very tightly, barely noticing the painful sting, trying to keep herself from falling apart, clinging to this symbol of hope and control, despite the anxiety and despair raging inside her, as if holding on to her broken heart. After that, Rosetta closed her eyes in anger and disappointment, gritting her teeth from deep fatigue and mental pain, desperately trying to hold back the tears and all the accumulated weakness that was rising in her throat, not wanting to show even the slightest sign of vulnerability. With a slight, barely noticeable, ironic grin, the guy standing nearby confidently and with a hint of mockery declared that since the little sister decided to get a wild and unruly beast, now she would have to put in a lot of effort to tame this force, otherwise it could turn against its owner herself. Leaning against the headboard of the soft bed and taking a deep breath, she thought with irritation and slight disbelief that her brother was a real idiot who recklessly dragged her into this confusing, dangerous, and not at all simple situation, completely disregarding her feelings and experiences. In the original story, Rosetta was often hunting and almost accidentally shot the prince himself with an arrow, not realizing his true identity, as in front of her stood only a majestic and mysterious white wolf, shrouded in the mystery and mysticism of the night, causing both fear and admiration. Waking up and opening her eyes wide, the girl quickly realized that in the original story, the main character would have captured this wolf and locked him in a cage, not even suspecting who he really was, an heir whose destiny was hidden under the guise of a beast and the darkness of the moonlight. When the full moon came, Sihael von Idris would irreversibly and with full force transform into a wolf, unable to return to human form until the very end of the night luminary, which made him doomed to a painful struggle between the bestial and human principles of soul and body. Against the backdrop of the mysterious and starry night sky hung an ancient, enigmatic key, carefully tied with a bright red ribbon, as if a symbol of inevitable hope, deep mystery, and destiny, which was closely connected with this mystical transformation and the coming trials. When Rosetta finally became convinced that Sihael von Idris was indeed the wolf from legends and tales, she immediately fell madly in love with him, feeling in her heart the awakening of sincere and deep feelings that defied logic and explanation. At first, she was overjoyed that she had finally found her lost prince, that mysterious and alluring man she had dreamed of, but this happiness quickly turned to bitterness and despair when she learned that he already had a lover, devoted and unwavering. Broken inside and full of determination, she decided not to just let go of the situation, but to chain him, tie him up and hold him close like a prisoner, so as not to allow anyone or anything to take away her only one, even if it meant resorting to extreme measures and cruel actions. Rosetta was shocked and stunned to discover that the wolf was indeed locked in her own basement, where dark walls kept his secrets and cold chains held his freedom tightly, making her feel both power and fear of what was happening. The lady found herself tied with a bright red thread that wrapped around her neck like a symbol of captivity and internal conflict, and she was in complete shock from what was happening, realizing that she herself had fallen into the trap of her passions, fears, and betrayals, which now fettered not only the wolf, but also her own heart. With great interest and slight inner excitement, she slowly and carefully examined the ancient silver key in her hands, thinking about what decisive steps to take now and how to deal with this mysterious and dangerous beast that had unexpectedly become her burden. Soon the key was thrown aside in irritation, as if she wanted to get rid of all unnecessary worries and anxieties, putting it aside in order to distance herself, at least for a short time, from the weight of her experiences and the numerous difficulties that had fallen upon her at once and simultaneously. The maiden sighed heavily and deeply, wearily closing her eyes, trying to find in the depths of her exhausted soul at least a grain of long-awaited peace and sincere hope, despite the raging storm of conflicting emotions that filled her heart and mind like an inexorable storm. She heard loud, sharp, and piercing screams coming from the cramped and gloomy cage, and unable to bear the intrusive noise and fuss, she screamed sharply, ordering the beast to immediately shut up to stop its unbearable screams and excessive aggression, which only increased the tension. She covered her ears with her hands, trying to shield herself from the annoying and sharp barking, and asked herself with confusion why the wolf showed such hostility towards her, and not towards her brother, who had first caught and held him, as if the beast sensed something special in her presence. The beast growled wildly and continuously, angrily flashing its bright golden eyes and baring its menacing sharp fangs, as if trying to instill genuine fear and show its unyielding strength before the woman who dared to approach it without the slightest fear or doubt. Raising her head with lively interest and slight wariness, she carefully and thoughtfully asked the beast if he really disliked her so categorically that he expressed such obvious malice and alienation, as if she were his sworn enemy, who had to be kept at a safe distance. The animal growled again, showing its sharp teeth, radiating obvious undisguised anger and hostility, as if confirming that its patience was at its limit, and it was ready to defend itself at any cost, not intending to give in or show the slightest weakness. Sitting down on a chair right in front of this menacing and threatening monster, she admitted with quiet sarcasm that she didn't particularly like him either, demonstrating stubbornness and a kind of mutual rejection that turned their communication into a tense and dangerous game of nerves and wills. When the lady asked if he would let her out of this difficult and dangerous situation, the monster growled loudly and angrily in response, expressing a clear and categorical unwillingness to obey or give in, as if declaring his absolute power and complete control over what was happening around him. Raising her index finger up in a firm intent, Rosetta promised the beast that she would let him go if he did not harm or eat her, asking him to nod in confirmation of this agreement to establish at least a minimum of trust and understanding between them. The monster slowly rose to its paws, grinning wildly and baring its sharp teeth. A massive collar glittered on its neck, to which a heavy chain was attached, restricting its movements and reminding it of the captivity to which it had not yet come to terms. Raising her hands in front of her in a gesture of appeasement, the lady spoke softly, soothing words, assuring him that she meant him no harm, and that the wolf should not be angry or afraid of her at all, trying to establish at least a fragile contact and temporary truce with him. Rosetta could never fully understand whether this wild creature had intelligence or just instincts, but despite her doubts, she firmly ordered him to stand still and not come closer in order to maintain at least some safety in this strange and difficult situation. With a heavy sigh, the girl began to carefully consider how exactly to deal with this damned wolf, because it was the main character of the book who had to remove the terrible spell from him, and she could only appear in a whole month, leaving Rosetta in complete ignorance and constant anxiety. The monster seemed to be very upset and recoiled, closing his eyes, as if understanding the meaning of her words, and feeling the same reluctance to be alone with her. His mood was far from joyful and calm, which added to the palpable tension in the room. Lillian, the main character of the novel, was a beautiful blonde with the gift of magic, possessing the ability to heal and remove any spells and curses, which made her appearance in the story so important, long-awaited and decisive for all the surrounding characters. At first sight, the girl fell unconditionally in love with the mysterious wolf and quickly realized that a man was hiding under this animal appearance, so she decisively removed the ancient curse from him, returning him to his former human form and the dignity of a true hero. Sihel von Idris had been in the form of a wild beast for a long time, and now that he had become human again, it was extremely unusual and difficult for him to get used to his previous appearance and life among people, which added to the inner turmoil and uncertainty in every day. Then, as if a spark of magic ran between them, his strong hands intertwined with her gentle fingers, and at that moment, a real, sincere, and touching love arose between the young people, filled with hope, faith, and new deep feelings. Staring up at the white ceiling of her room, lost and thoughtful, Rosetta quickly realized and accepted the fact that she was about to spend a long, difficult month living with the Wolf Prince, which was the beginning of a new and amazing chapter in their lives. Looking down, the girl thoughtfully came to the thought that perhaps it would be much easier for her to imagine that she was simply raising an obedient puppy rather than dealing with a wild and unpredictable werewolf who required special patience and a special approach to himself. The wolf continued to watch her carefully and warily, his eyes expressing deep mistrust and hidden anger, as if he could not understand what exactly she had done to deserve such treatment and why now she, and not he, should obey. The beast's mighty body was marked with visible wounds and deep scars after brutal battles, each injury telling of difficult trials and the struggle for survival in this cruel world, reminding that he was not a simple beast, but a true warrior. Standing up and waving her hand, Rosetta firmly told the werewolf to wait for her in the cage. She promised to quickly go get some medicine and return as soon as possible to give him the help he needed and heal all the wounds that cruel fate and the fate of those around him had inflicted on him. The aristocrat, with a slight smile on her lips, realized that the werewolf was gradually calming down, becoming more obedient and behaving somewhat better with her, as if he was slowly beginning to get used to her presence and understanding that she was not an enemy, but rather a caring jailer. The majestic, snow-white mansion with tall towers that seemed to reach into the sky struck with its beauty and severity, like a monument to an ancient era, keeping secrets and power, protected by the winds and time that carefully wrapped around its walls. The entrance to the dungeon was a narrow, steep staircase made of ancient stone, dimly lit by a flickering lantern, whose reflections ran along the damp walls, creating a mysterious play of light and shadow, enveloping the space in cold and the darkness of the unknown. The lady, moving with restraint across the cold stone floor, carried a neatly laid plate of food in her hands, trying not to disturb the silence and darkness of the dungeon, where every step echoed in the emptiness like a small ritual of caring for a prisoner in captivity. The wolf suddenly noticed her approach, shuddered from the sharp sensation of her presence, and tensed up warily as if realizing that she was his strict jailer, the only one who held the keys to freedom, and at the same time the guard who did not allow him to leave the dungeon. A woman's hand carefully handed him a plate on which lay juicy pieces of red meat, as if calling for trust and peace, and watching the monster, Rosetta secretly hoped that he would always behave as calmly and obediently as he did now. Besides her eyes, she closely followed every movement of the beast, which greedily devoured the food, and she noticed with relief that now the guy was completely focused on the food, no longer looking at her warily, as he had before, when he was afraid that the meat could be poisoned. Rosetta noted the change with interest. Now the wolf did not show a shadow of suspicion or fear in her direction, but was completely immersed in the meal, which gave her hope that mutual understanding and trust could gradually appear between them, despite their difficult relationship. The wolf continued to eat the pieces of meat with obvious pleasure and joy, as if finding this the only comforting moment in his imprisoned life, and Rosetta couldn't help but smile, watching as the beast gradually softened and became less menacing and inaccessible. The lady smiled slightly, feeling a timid hope that perhaps she would be able to find a common language with this wild monster and even become friends, because deep down she wanted their connection to become stronger and warmer despite all the difficulties. The monster, however, took particular pleasure in devouring meat, whether chicken, pork, or other types, as if savoring each piece with greed and gratitude, which made Rosetta believe in the possibility of change and improvement in their relationship. An image of herself vividly appeared in her thoughts, as if she herself were that very juicy, tasty meat that had now become the monster's favorite, because it was she who gave him food, thereby giving him a piece of care and hope. With a heavy sigh and barely holding back tears, Rosetta sadly thought that despite everything, she was still just meat for him, prey and not a friend, and this bitter realization painfully squeezed her heart, making her feel lonely in this dark world. Leaning her back against the cold and marble stone wall of the ancient castle, the lady thoughtfully and deeply thought about how to find a way to the heart of a wild and unpredictable monster in order to become a true loyal friend to him and melt the ice of alienation that covered his harsh soul. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to strange, disturbing sounds. A wolf was loudly and aggressively devouring a large piece of meat, growling and rumbling, expressing both hunger and mistrust, filling the room with wild energy, as if anticipating something important and inevitable. Unable to bear the internal tension and fear, Rosetta carefully knelt down in front of the beast, trying to establish eye contact with him and show that she was there, despite his growling and threatening appearance, sincerely wanting to become not an enemy for him, but a reliable ally in this cruel world. Her eyes reflected a mixture of doubt and determination. She understood that this path would not be easy, but she was ready to endure and fight to win the trust of someone who was once a man and now turned into a monster, and perhaps together they would find light even in the thickest darkness. The monster healed his deep wounds with astonishing speed and incredible ease, as if his body had the most natural healing power, which brought admiration and a slight smile to the face of the lady, who watched this with quiet surprise and tenderness. Turning away with a soft smile on her lips, Rosetta quietly said that perhaps she would also go and have a snack, because after much thought and worry, a little food would not hurt, and it would help her collect her thoughts and continue her unusual path next to the monster. The monster, without taking his bright golden eyes off the girl, carefully watched her every step, as if trying to understand her mood and intentions, and his gaze was filled with a mixture of curiosity, mistrust, and growing affection, which made the atmosphere around especially tense. After these observations, he slowly closed his eyes, his snow-white fur gently swaying under the dim light, and, allowing himself to relax, he sank into a light sleep, as if trusting Rosetta and the world around him, which was a rare and touching moment of their communication. Noticing her brother's arrival, she hurried to meet him at the entrance. Her heart began to beat faster from the long-awaited meeting, and excitement was mixed with joy, because seeing a loved one after a long absence was always especially touching and dear. It was Renoa, a handsome young man with golden hair that shimmered softly in the sun, and deep golden eyes that radiated nobility. His features were graceful and clearly sculpted, as if nature had created them for an aristocrat of true birth. The culprit of the brothers' sudden visit was none other than the snow-white wolf, Rosetta's pet, who, like a guard, watched what was happening with close attention, forcing the atmosphere to become tense to the limit and reminding of the difficult connection between brothers and sister. Annoyed and slightly saddened, Rosetta quietly noted to herself that her brother visited their home too rarely, as if immersed in his own worries and affairs, forgetting about those who remained here waiting and hoping for warm meetings in the family circle. Renoa, closing his eyes and sighing, calmly said that he never really stayed at home, always finding reasons to slip away from his usual life, preferring the freedom of wandering and unknown roads to the cozy family hearth. He was a true adventurer, a fearless wanderer who lived by his own rules, never being tied to one place, carrying all his belongings on his back, like a light wind that glides freely through the world, guided only by the call of the road and the moment. Sitting at a massive wooden table in the back of the antique living room, Renoa and Rosetta fell into a heavy silence, as if an invisible wall had been erected between them, where each felt alienated and awkward because their paths in life were too different to find common ground. The noblewoman involuntarily shuddered when she heard her brother's unexpected question about whether she had given her pet a new name, as if the very mention of it caused a wave of anxiety and inner turmoil in her soul, making her heart beat faster and her thoughts get confused. Despite the internal tension and anxiety, she calmly picked up the cutlery, firmly cutting off a neat piece of expensive meat, as if trying to distract herself from obsessive thoughts and gather all her willpower to adequately answer the provocative question. Her relative, playing with a sly smile and with a barely noticeable shadow of mockery in his voice, said that she simply had to give a name to her beast, as if it were not just a formal gesture, but something sacred that would determine the true connection between the owner and her pet. These words caused irritation and internal coldness in sweet Rosetta. She was clearly not in the mood for jokes and fun, while her brother seemed to perceive the whole situation as a funny game, which only aggravated her anxiety and increased the feeling of loneliness in this house. The young man had a more secretive and severe character than his sister, and Rosetta was absolutely sure that if he took the wolf under his power, he would become an object of cruel torment, deprived of any affection, care, and understanding, doomed to suffering. And then Sihael von Idris, deprived of all warmth, support, and human care, would forever lose his only chance to find a partner, to regain his former human appearance, and to escape from the frightening circle of eternal loneliness, pain, and deep despair. Renoa, without a shadow of doubt or regret, could mercilessly take the life of the poor animal, taking away from it even the slightest hope of salvation, and at the same time he himself would be expelled from his own family, becoming forever a stranger and abandoned in this cruel world. Seeing her brother's dark, sad, and bitter gaze, Rosetta instantly realized that before him and before her lay a gloomy path leading to an inevitable sad end, filled with hopeless longing and bitter, irresistible sadness. Rosetta firmly and without a shadow of a doubt declared that no one, including her brother, would dare even come close to her pet, because this beast was her personal responsibility and destiny, completely belonging only to her, and she intended to strictly guard its peace and safety. She gripped the fork in her hand so tightly that the metal creaked and bent, as if obeying her inner tension, desperate determination, and unwavering will, making it clear that her words were not just empty threats, but firm promises that should not be tested. Grabbing her brother's face gently but insistently, Rosetta pointed her fork at his cheek so that he would finally pay attention to the food and understand that caring for his own health was no less important than her demand for the protection of the wolf, which contained all her tenderness and responsibility. After that, she slowly sat back down, took a deep breath, and, closing her eyes, took a glass of wine, as if searching in its thick aroma for the long-awaited peace in which she could forget about the tense conversation and find a short rest from the heaviness of the situation at the table. Despite her brother's harsh and hurtful words about how she once wanted to kill him, Rosetta chose silence and inner fortitude, ignoring these memories in order to maintain a fragile balance and not allow the past to destroy the taciturn calm that she managed to find. Late in the evening, with a trembling hand clinging to the cool stone ledges of the wall, with the other hand pressing a flickering lantern to his chest, with trepidation and firm determination, he slowly descended deeper into the ominous, long-forgotten, mold-soaked dungeon. The gloomy wolf, suddenly pulled out of his viscous sleep by a thin silver strip of light, took a deep breath of the night air, slowly opened his golden, like molten amber eyes and shuddered, sensing an unknown threat lurking in the corners of the cave. When, in the dim light of the torch, he again discerned the stern silhouette of his implacable jailer, peering tenaciously through the metal bars, he expressed his bitter disappointment and gradually fading hope for deliverance with a heavy, despondent sigh. The girl slowly moved the wooden chair right up to the bars and sat down opposite the cage, as if intending to get comfortable and spend some time, making up a sort of strange but quite determined company for the silent monster. Folding her graceful arms across her chest and squinting her attentive eyes, she calmly said that she was going to list several names out loud, and he, captive in the cage, should choose one, the one that would especially resonate in his soul. When the first of her suggested names was heard, the whitish beast in the corner of the cage bared its sharp fangs in irritation, making it clear without words that this name evoked in it a strong rejection, like a bitter taste on the tongue. Tapping her fingertip against her lip, her head tilted to the side thoughtfully, she suddenly said the next name, this time with a soft smile, Hail, as if tasting it on her tongue before presenting it to the beast as a possible reflection of his new essence. Hearing the familiar, seemingly long forgotten, but still holding special meaning letters, the wolf raised his head sharply, and in his gaze flashed not anger, as before, but a strange, almost childish curiosity, as if something inside responded to this name. Rosetta, with a warm, mysterious smile, leaned a little closer to the bars of the cage, and looking closely at the creature's face, gently asked if he liked this new name. And although the monster did not answer, his calm stillness seemed to silently agree. Having settled herself comfortably, resting her chin on her palm and not taking her eyes off his golden eyes, she announced in a solemn and even slightly playful tone that from that moment on his new name was Hale, and that was how she would call him from now on and forever. She wore an elegant, airy white lace dress, the hem of which fell smoothly to the floor, creating the impression that she was not walking but floating through the semi-darkness, bringing with her not only light, but also a new destiny for the one who was forgotten. The mysterious lady spent the entire evening without leaving the cage, conducting a leisurely conversation with the monster, whose eyes gradually lost their fury. He felt less and less malice towards her, as if her voice began to awaken in him something forgotten, almost human. The next morning, sunlight softly entered the luxurious room through the high-arched window, illuminating the marble columns, expensive carpet, and exquisite furniture, giving the room a majestic and almost fairy-tale-like appearance. The wolf raised his head, slowly turning towards the source of light, and blinking from the brightness, looked around with interest at the environment in which he had been unexpectedly placed, trying to understand where he was and why he had been brought here. Rosetta ordered the cage with the werewolf to be moved directly into her spacious room, and now 2 silent maids stood next to her, carefully watching the prisoner, as if trying to catch his every movement, every change in the expression of his eyes. A young girl with a robe on her shoulders stood opposite him, looking sternly and intently from top to bottom, her arms folded across her chest, like a judge deciding fate, but there was no longer any fear in her gaze, only determination and a lively interest in the one who was hiding behind the bars. Hale, feeling a heavy and intent gaze on himself, smoothly turned around, carefully pricked up his ears, and directed an attentive, studying gaze in response, as if wanting to read the thoughts of his interlocutor through the silence and bars of the cage. A soft pillow of deep, rich blue was carefully and meticulously thrown onto the impeccably polished parquet flooring right in front of the massive cage, like a living invitation to trust, and a subtle attempt to bring a warm drop of coziness into the cold, intense atmosphere. Rosetta, noticing in the depths of her devoted servant's eyes a barely noticeable spark of confusion, intertwined with slight fear and anxiety, only smiled softly and encouragingly, and then quietly and tenderly laughed, as if in front of her was not a wild animal in a cage but a defenseless and naive puppy. Despite all the serenity and calm that seemed to emanate from her mistress, the maid slowly and again turned her wary gaze to the mysterious creature behind the bars, and no matter how hard she tried to convince herself otherwise, she still could not believe that it could be completely harmless. The maid named Marina, standing to the right of her proud mistress, bowed her head with a respectful and attentive bow, hearing a clear and firm order to prepare a spacious and bright room next door, where her mistress's new mysterious pet was now to settle down. With a slight but noticeable alarm in her voice, looking down slightly, the maid nevertheless dared to clarify whether the mistress was sure of such a rash decision, because keeping a wild, dangerous, uncontrollable creature next to her was extremely reckless and scary. However, Rosetta did not even listen to the worried question to the end, smoothly turned away with a thin, almost mocking smile and a cold gleam in her eyes, calmly ordering the maid to securely strengthen the walls, locks, doors, bars, and bolts of the room. Taking a measured, almost theatrical step forward, with a gentle, almost affectionate, but alarming smile, Rosetta put her palm to her chest and asked the maid in a menacing voice if she could do everything clearly, quickly, flawlessly, and without hesitation. And so Marina, standing at the threshold and watching her calm, contented mistress, thought that perhaps by strengthening, she meant the unification of 2 adjacent, previously separate chamber rooms into one protected common space. Rosetta, hearing the maid's restrained and polite question, slowly opened her eyes, turned over her shoulder, and, with a slight hint of irritation in her voice, said that they should now simply finish what they had started and carry out the instructions without delay or unnecessary words. Each of the maids carefully held in their hands a sturdy muzzle with reliable fasteners, specially designed to restrain possible outbursts of rage. After all, no one could accurately predict when the wolf might break loose from its chain again. The wolf himself, calmly curled up on a soft and cozy pillow, pressed against the cold wall, looked surprisingly quiet, serene, and almost tame, so peaceful and harmless that even the bulky and heavy muzzle seemed completely unnecessary. So Rosetta, without the slightest hesitation or wavering for a moment, firmly refused to use a muzzle on her monster, calmly and confidently declaring that it was now completely unnecessary, except perhaps on those rare occasions when she decided to take the wolf out for a walk. The servants, hearing this stunning statement from their frail but determined mistress, looked at each other in silent horror and almost dropped their trays, because the idea of walking with a monster seemed to them insane, dangerous, unimaginable, and extremely risky. Rosetta, completely ignoring their wary and distrustful looks, with a soft, almost childish and touching smile, calmly declared that she could not keep the wolf locked in the room forever, because he, as a living creature, could become bored, sad, melancholy, and lonely. Having finished her conversation, the lady turned around smoothly and gracefully, after which, in a cold and firm tone, she gave the order to one of the maids to forge a strong and durable metal collar for the beast, on which it was necessary to engrave her name, surname, address, and family symbol on the back. Slyly looking away and covering her lips with an elegant hand, Rosetta said with a mysterious half-smile and a quiet, mysterious voice that in this cruel world there have always been people who once tried to steal a wolf, pursuing their own selfish goals. The maid, looking warily at the changed face of her mistress, frowned and asked in a low voice whether these people really wanted to kill the monster or were striving for something more terrible, connected with ancient magical legends and curses. But Rosetta only smiled evasively in response and advised Marina to immediately forget what had just been discussed, otherwise she, poor thing, might decide to get to the bottom of the truth, which simple and weak-hearted servants should not know. For them, ordinary people, rumors about a mysterious silver wolf can turn into trouble, because the empress herself did not give up trying to find her missing son, a werewolf who, at the full moon, turned into a monster, losing his appearance and human will. But no, she did not love him at all. On the contrary, from birth she harbored in her heart a deep and burning hatred for the prince, and was ready without hesitation to send a hired killer to destroy the heir forever, as soon as she found out in what distant and hidden corner of the world he was hiding under a mask. Rosetta raced across the surface of the chessboard like a piece on a field, moving further and further away from the gloomy and merciless empress, whose cold and unfeeling gaze, filled with ruthlessness, pierced her soul like sharp and cutting steel without the slightest hint of compassion. With a heavy sigh, the girl quietly whispered to herself, deeply suppressing the inner fear and anxiety that did not leave her soul, admitting that she hated all bloody deeds and merciless cruelties, but at the same time hoped that her cunning deception would go unnoticed and calmly. A bitter thought flashed through her mind. Even though the wolf was considered by many to be a cruel, ferocious, and menacing dog, she categorically did not want him to suffer and die in the merciless hands of the powerful empress who, for the sake of her power, was capable of any cruel acts without a drop of regret. When Rosetta suddenly appeared at the cage with this mysterious monster, the beast, as if sensing her approach, barked loudly, showing an indomitable protective instinct, and suddenly frightened the girl with its powerful and menacing rage, which disturbed the quiet and cold atmosphere of the room. The lady stepped aside, upset and a little sad, with a slight sadness in her voice, carefully asking the wolf why he was barking so loudly and obsessively, which was the reason for his obvious displeasure, as if he wanted to protest or express his unwillingness to accept her intentions and mood. The wolf, looking away and as if hiding his true feelings, looked absolutely indifferent and unconcerned, demonstrating that he did not care at all how much his barking could frighten or upset his mistress, as if he did not recognize her as his true protector or leader. Pointing a firm and determined finger straight at him, Rosetta repeated with unwavering insistence that from now on she would not only be his protector, but also his true mistress, and insistently demanded that he no longer bark without her express permission. In response, the wolf growled at his mistress in frustration and menacingly, as if expressing disobedience and irritation, demonstrating that his feelings could not be so easily suppressed, and she, with bitterness and deep regret in her voice, admitted that, apparently, all her attempts to scold him were in vain. The lady and the rest of the servants pressed their ears in fear, overcome with anxiety and tension, when a loud and sharp barking echoed throughout the spacious mansion, which made everyone wary, silent, and hold their breath, sensing an approaching storm and an unknown threat. A loud and commanding cry echoed throughout the mansion, in which the lady firmly ordered her pet to immediately stop disobeying and submit, reminding him that she was his true mistress, deserving respect and unconditional obedience. The maids hastily covered their ears with their palms and, pretending to be pages from a dusty tapestry, clearly demonstrated that they heard absolutely nothing, while the enraged mistress, in an almost operatic falsetto, ordered her pet to obey unconditionally. Rosetta Carcel, exhausted by the endless howling, wrinkled her chiseled nose and, repeating the gesture of the servants, covered her ears with lace cuffs, for even her patient soul began to be tired of the excessively loud, impudent beast whose sounds seemed to vibrate in the air. The monster, with its thick, honey-colored eyes sparkling, fixed a heavy gaze on Rosetta, and like a thunderstorm growled long and gutturally with primal malice, causing the walls to tremble and the candle flames to flicker slightly, carving threatening shadows on the walls. Suddenly the door swung open, rattling its hinges, and Renoa rushed into the room like a whirlwind. In a tenor voice he begged his sister to immediately pacify her unruly wolf, before he turned the drawing room into a kingdom of chaos and torn brocade. The aristocrat, with a subtle, measured arrogance, raised her chin, looked coldly and slightly mockingly at her brother, and then, throwing a glance in his direction filled with icy contempt and pride, made it clear that she considered his reproaches insignificant and completely unworthy of a response. The wolf, as if disdaining the very fact of someone's presence, chuckled silently but expressively, throwing a short, piercingly indifferent and full of animal superiority glance, demonstrating that neither the voice of his brother nor the reproaches of people were capable of shaking his confidence in his own unbridled wildness. Renoa, clutching his head with both hands, loudly exclaimed in despair and irritation that Lady Rosetta was completely incapable of either training or understanding the nature of a monster, and that all her efforts were just a waste of time, like a futile attempt to tame a storm with the rustle of an old fan. At these caustic, unfair words, the beautiful maiden flared up with anger and shame, and the faithful, loving sisters standing behind her could not hold back their tears. With sincere, deep pity for their mistress, they cried quietly, feeling how every word hurt her noble heart. The maids tried their best to support their beloved mistress. Clasping their trembling hands in front of them, they stood in tense silence, holding back the tears that were already treacherously glistening on their eyelashes and threatening to spill from sympathy. Rosetta Carcel, with a sly grin and a displeased wave of her hand, gave the wolf the order to bark as loudly as possible, filling the room with a wild howl, in order to deliberately annoy her brother Renoa, who was irritated by every sound that disturbed his fragile peace. Renoa, sighing heavily, covered his face with his hand, and through his lowered eyelashes, looked extremely disappointed, as if the whole world around him had risen up against him. His head, as if filled with lead, throbbed with noise and frustration. He covered his ears with his hands, trying to escape from the maddening barking, but the howl was so piercing that it seemed physically perceptible. The eardrums in his ears stretched to the limit, almost bursting, and everything around him vibrated as if the end of the world was approaching. While his sister, barely holding back a satisfied smile, watched her brother's suffering with genuine glee, Renoa managed to sincerely repent that he himself, out of naivety or stupidity, had once dragged this damn wolf into the house, not suspecting how everything would turn out. Rosetta Carcel, looking at what was happening through the noise and disorder, thought to herself with tired resignation that everything around had finally turned into a mess, chaos, farce. And why, one wonders, did she get involved in all this and endure this beastly circus? The mansion, white and majestic as if woven from a marble dream, towered over the surrounding area as a symbol of luxury, pride, and refined power, but inside it was something more reminiscent of a fairground than the home of a noble family. While the wolf, settling in like a true aristocrat among animals, dozed in the cage on a soft pillow, placed with the care usually shown to dear guests, Rosetta Carcel silently sank down on the sofa, crossing her arms over her chest and immersed in thoughts about the events of the last few days. Her gaze lingered on the tall, neatly aligned stack of books resting on the table. The thought slowly formed in her mind of how convenient and pleasant it would be if the carefully constructed and multi-layered plan that she had worked so hard to implement finally began to bear fruit. With slight hesitation, she reached out and selected one of the books from the row, a blue thick one with a worn spine, which contained descriptions of the behavioral characteristics of particularly aggressive dogs that seemed similar to her current beast. Almost all the books that had been collected in her library in recent weeks were devoted exclusively to dogs, their instincts, reactions, gestures, methods of submission, training, and the psychological mechanisms that control even the wildest specimens. The author whose works lay before her was widely known for his series of popular manuals on dog training, which had once sold in thousands of copies under an ironic but memorable title such as Bestseller for Dummies About Dogs, becoming a real sensation. Rosetta Carcel, with the persistence worthy of a scientific researcher, carefully, page by page, read each book by this author, hoping one day to become not just the owner of a wild animal, but a person capable of controlling its behavior and will. Feeling how fatigue was increasingly covering her body, the noblewoman quietly exhaled as she sank down onto the wide bed with carved headboards, placing her palm on her forehead, where a dull pain was pulsating, caused not only by lack of sleep, but also by the emotional stress of the last few days. Despite all her efforts, she tried unsuccessfully to command the wolf, hoping to teach him discipline, to teach him the simplest commands, but the beast, keeping its own laws in its soul, ignored her words with lazy indifference, not taking them seriously. The dog, like a black shadow near a night fire, stared motionlessly at her face, narrowing its yellowish eyes with thin sparks of mistrust and cunning, as if thinking over a cunning, clever, multi-move plan that was about to silently burst out. And after a few lingering moments, a huge wolf with his fur standing on end and a sharp cold wind in his throat broke the silence with a deafening metallic bark, mixing it with a dull primeval growl and a fountain of sparkling saliva in the moonlight. In desperation, Rosetta Carcel, her voice hoarse, screamed hysterically, begging the enraged beast to find peace, to sit down on its powerful paws, and finally, to carry out the memorized command that could return silence to the world and a sigh of relief to her. Then, trembling with tension, she snatched a heavy ribbed bone from the chest, handed the trophy to the dog and, feeling the anxiety gradually dissipate in her chest, hoped that the taste of victory and the crunch of calcium would finally force the beast to calm its raging temper. A tall, snow-white house with a steep slate roof, like a time ship, hid within itself an intricate network of corridors where the sun's rays, breaking through the cleaned windows, glided along the marble walls and gilded frames, whispering stories of bygone eras. The werewolf, with a contemptuous grin on his face, turned away sharply, demonstrating with his whole appearance his irritation and inner indignation, as if her mere presence caused a storm of emotions in him, restrained on the verge of a violent explosion. Sihael von Idris, from the very first seconds of his appearance, made it clear that all the titles, regalia, influential connections, and authority of the lady were an empty sound for him, like crumpled sheets of paper thrown to the wind, having neither weight nor value. Lowering her head, Rosetta said with a quiet sigh that with such a character and a complete lack of mutual understanding between them, she and the wolf would never get out for a walk, which she had dreamed of for so long and prepared for with all her heart. However, the wolf, without making a sound or even deigning to nod, calmly walked past her, as if her words had never existed, leaving behind only the traces of his heavy paws and the feeling that the whole scene was insignificant to him and not worth paying attention to. Frustrated and depressed by the fact that she could not establish a connection with her pet, the lady covered her face with her hand, as if trying to hide from the world all the bitterness of disappointment that was slowly spreading in her soul, like a cold autumn rain. The girl, having lowered herself onto the soft sofa, put her hand on her head, feeling how the fatigue and heaviness of the day slowly settled in every muscle, and the nearby table with neatly stacked books seemed like the only island of peace and comfort in this chaos. Suddenly, as if awakened by an inner fire, she rose to her feet with a firm determination in her eyes, ready to break down all barriers and regain control of the situation, despite the fatigue and doubts that had long tried to paralyze her. Feminine, light steps were heard along the corridor, picked up by the rustle of the flowing snow outside the window, and in the dim light of the lamps, soft blue shoes and an elegant dress shimmered, emphasizing her fragility and unshakable strength at the same time. The maid, carefully holding a tray with appetizingly smelling meat, carefully approached the mistress and with a slight bow announced that she had brought food for her pet, hoping that this nasty wolf, although a real asshole, would finally receive at least a little consolation in the form of food. Even though this wolf was a real asshole, causing irritation to everyone around him, but since he was locked up and locked in a cramped cage, he still needed to be fed with something, because even the most unruly animal deserves minimal attention and care. The maid muttered sadly and with obvious bitterness in her voice that she did not want to feed this terrible beast at all, bringing a tray with meat that seemed too valuable to her for such a disobedient pet, causing only irritation and anxiety to everyone around. Meanwhile, Rosetta Carcel strolled leisurely through the fragrant garden of the greenhouse, surrounded by the aromas of flowering plants and delicate roses floating in the warm air, wondering where she could find the main character of that book, the one whose fate and actions were to serve as an example for her. Lillian, whose beauty was striking in its unusual tenderness and light, as if woven from sunlight, yellow hair, possessed real magic, the power to heal any wounds and curses, as if nature itself whispered its ancient secrets to her and bestowed a blessing. This mysterious maiden never stayed in one place. Like the wind, she constantly wandered the world, collecting knowledge and experience, bringing light and healing to where darkness and suffering reigned, making her journey an eternal search for meaning and truth. No one could catch up with her. Like the wind, she was constantly slipping away, gliding through time and space, leaving behind only a barely perceptible whisper and a feeling of unattainable freedom that could not be denied or caught. Rosetta Carcel strolled leisurely along the shady alleys of the greenhouse, carefully examining the surrounding garden with its lush flowers and delicate aromas that seemed to fill the air with magic and awaken the most subtle feelings in her soul. Suddenly, like a bolt of lightning, she stopped abruptly, listening warily to the piercing cries and desperate pleas that sounded like a cry for salvation, penetrated deep into her heart and caused a storm of anxiety that made the blood run cold in her veins. With shock and obvious fear reflected in her wide eyes, Rosetta instantly turned around, peering intensely into the darkness around her, trying to determine the exact location from where those heartbreaking voices were coming, yearning for help and salvation from imminent danger. Without hesitation or reflection, the lady rushed to run in the direction of the screams, driven by the desire to come to the aid of someone in trouble, feeling that every step she took brought her closer to danger, but also to the opportunity to change someone's fate. Above the massive, time-worn gray wrought iron doors, whose cold steel exuded the smell of raw iron, rose an elegant stone arch, decorated with intricate curls and intricate symbols that seemed to whisper of the secrets hidden behind it. The doors suddenly burst open, and a confused youth and a frightened maid tumbled out with a crash, their elbows interlocked in a disorderly whirlwind of ribbons. They collapsed on the cold marble slabs, where the echo of their fall mingled with the anxious whispers of the empty corridors. A primordial, bestial roar suddenly rang out from behind. A monster, as if woven from nightmare and coals, exhaled clouds of hot stench, and the rumblings of its guttural low roars vibrated in the bones, warning of an inevitable predatory leap. Rosetta Carcel froze, unable to believe her own eyes. On the deserted street where the chain had just been clanking loudly, heavy rings suddenly rolled across the stones, and a huge wolf, breaking free from its shackles, slowly raised its amber eyes to the girl. Her eyes, the color of a deep, ocean-blue sky, were wide open in complete horror, her pupils dilated to the limit, and in her gaze there was a silent scream, as if her soul itself could not comprehend the nightmare that had just burst into reality with fury. The monster had burst out of her room, smashing through the doorframe and leaving behind a whirlwind of torn sheets, shreds of wallpaper and broken furniture, and was now standing at the top of the stairs, towering in the malevolent shadow, glaring at her with a look full of fury and hatred. Yellow, like dim moonlight on a stormy night, the monster's eyes sparkled with malice, rage, and unbridled wildness, and in their predatory, piercing gleam, one could read only one goal: the complete destruction of all living things that dared to enter its field of vision. Its mouth was wide open, like a gaping abyss, in which terrifyingly sharp, curved, jagged fangs gleamed, emitting a metallic grinding sound, and each of them seemed to be created to tear flesh, instill terror, and tear out the last cries of fear. The young girl took a hesitant step back, overcome with great fear, as if every movement she made could provoke an attack, and at that moment it seemed as if the very space around her was thickening, threateningly hanging over her fragile figure in the tense silence. The terrible dark shadow of the monster hung heavily over her, its silhouette obscured by the bright light coming from the windows. Their eyes met in deathly silence, not allies at all, not random passers-by, but enemies, divided by a silent, chilling malice. With a loud stomping and clanking of weapons, night guys, dressed in armor, ran out into the courtyard, their hands tightly clenched on the hilts of their swords, and each of them was ready to engage in mortal combat with the wolf to protect the honor and lives of those nearby. Moreover, two people were running towards the monster and the noble Rosetta Carcel, her younger brother, clenching his fists in despair, and the devoted maid whose eyes were filled with tears of anxiety. Both were driven by excitement, concern, and panic fear. Herself, despite all the chaos around her, could not move. Her body seemed to be bound by invisible chains. Fear paralyzed every nerve. Her eyes were wide open, and her breathing became intermittent, as if she was drowning in her own horror. And suddenly, like a flash of lightning in the middle of a dark night, the werewolf, breaking free from his rusty chain, rushed forward, aiming at her with his mouth open, ready to sink his monstrous fangs into her tender flesh, and at that moment it seemed that there was no salvation, and could not be. The lady suddenly clenched her fist with astonishing determination. Her slender fingers dug into her palm with force, and her eyes lit up with a predatory fire of will and inner rage. Rosetta's face no longer reflected fear. It was filled with steely concentration, courage, and fortitude. Without a moment's hesitation, she loudly and commandingly ordered the werewolf to stop, her voice sounding like a bell, and, as if guided by something higher and unknown, she put all her great strength, anger, determination, and despair into one crushing blow. The huge wolf, not expecting resistance from the fragile aristocrat, flew back with a dull, ringing sound, sliding along the stone slabs with an echo of pain. His body jerked in a spasm, and confusion and incomprehension of what was happening flashed in his gaze. Rosetta Carcel herself stared in amazement at her trembling hand, not believing that she had just knocked down a wild monster. Her face was frozen in shock and awe. She could not even imagine that such an unknown power was hidden within it. Her younger brother and maid stopped dead in their tracks, shocked to the depths of their souls. Before them stood not a defenseless lady, but the embodiment of determination, strength, courage, and hidden power. No one could understand how such a fragile girl could do such a thing. Rosetta Carcel still stood with her fist outstretched, as if frozen in a bronze statue, and the defeated werewolf lay unconscious on the floor, his paws spread out. An absurd, almost comical scene, if not for the real threat hidden behind it. The girl possessed a special gift, rare and mysterious, a great, incomprehensible power that manifested itself only in the chosen ones, born once a century, and each such person became a legend, capable of changing the world with just their appearance and breath. From a very early age, the beautiful Rosetta wielded a sword perfectly, as if she had been born with a blade in her hand. Her movements were graceful, precise, and deadly effective. A natural swordswoman, she easily defeated even the masters of the old school of combat. She was also an excellent shot with a sharp bow. Each of her shots hit the target precisely, as if the arrows were subject not to the laws of physics, but to her inner will, concentration, and determination. This ability made her a warrior almost without weaknesses, vulnerability, and fear. She could easily pick up even a heavy rifle and shoot it with the precision of a true sniper, as if the weapon were an extension of her own will, without losing a drop of grace or composure in the most brutal and dangerous battle, where mistakes are not forgiven. Rosetta Carcel was also an excellent user of a massive battle mace, just like her famous follower from an ancient family. Every movement was honed, powerful, and swift, as if the very force of the earth and wind directed her blows, filling them with unknown power. The blade fell to the stone ground with a resounding clang, its polished edge glinting in the torchlight, as if reminding everyone gathered who was truly in control of the situation and who owned the battlefield on this dark and ominous evening. Rosetta Carcel waved her hand with a slight mockery in her voice and turned to the stunned knights, narrowing her eyes and asking with slight irony what they had been waiting for so long. After all, to deal with the werewolf, it was enough to simply hit him and quickly knock him out of consciousness without further ado. Then, when Rosetta spoke such words with unwavering confidence and cold defiance, all the high aristocrats around immediately froze and fell silent, deeply afraid of her immense power and unpredictable character, which threatened to overturn the foundations of their world. Pleading that these were just childish pranks and passing antics, her parents made the difficult decision to send the girl far away to a secluded estate, hidden behind a dense forest, with the hope that there she would calm down and find the peace that her stormy soul so lacked. Left alone, far from her native walls and familiar comfort, Rosetta Carcel, like a bird released into the wild, rushed into an endless journey through the harsh north, wandering through the vast expanses where the frosty wind and endless snow became her only companions. Poor, lonely, but determined. The blue sky above her head, with light, fluffy clouds softly floating across the endless expanse, seemed like the only bright and kind reminder of the world that was somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, still waiting for her return and new hope. The monster, having just regained consciousness after a heavy blow, rose with difficulty to its white paws, blinking its dull and tired eyes, trying to comprehend what was happening around it, as if it were still between worlds, alive and doomed to complete oblivion and oblivion. The noblewoman's fist remained clenched stubbornly and unwaveringly, squeezing within itself the greatest power hidden behind her delicate skin, the one that could break destinies and stop even the most ferocious, strongest, and most indomitable beast challenging her unwavering will. With cold, iron determination and fury mixed with bitter anger, she wildly, threateningly, and mercilessly asked the werewolf why he was testing her patience and not obeying, as if challenging not only her, but the entire world, where the rules have long been forgotten and power belongs only to the strongest. In response, the werewolf once again let out a deep, terrible, and threatening roar, mindless and bestial, filled only with wild rage and primal instincts, like a creature devoid of reason, but thirsting only for destruction and pain, knowing neither pity nor mercy for anyone. The ladies hurried, Quick steps sounded on the cold stone floor. Her elegant blue shoes and light, airy dress fluttered gently with each swift movement, as if foreshadowing the storm and determination with which she intended to enter into a furious battle with the impending danger. Without thinking twice and without wasting a single second of precious time, she quickly rushed into the attack, forming a tense and dangerous circle of struggle around herself, where a cruel and desperate fight broke out between her and the monster, full of fury and strength, like a struggle between light and darkness, good and evil. With her strong and sure fingers, Rosetta Carcel grabbed the thick, coarse fur of the monster and squeezed it with such unyielding force that it seemed that nature itself submitted to her will, and every living cell of the animal responded to her command with trepidation and fear, not daring to resist. Without thinking for a moment, the girl abruptly and decisively jumped on the beast's back from above and in a firm, commanding voice ordered him to stand still, not move a millimeter, and immediately calm down like a mistress, controlling even the wildest and most unruly elements with an iron grip. After this, the lady calmly and confidently growled at her maid to quickly hand over a large, strong, and reliable muzzle, necessary to reliably secure the dog and prevent any unpredictable and dangerous movements, because now absolute control was more important than anything. Thus, a strong and heavy muzzle was placed on the fierce and indomitable monster, ensuring the safety of all present and fettering his aggressive instincts, finally suppressing the raging storm of fury that was fiercely burning in his wild heart and mind. Rosetta Carcel fell off the mighty and ferocious wolf when it suddenly made a sharp and unpredictable movement and hit the hard and cold stone floor painfully, feeling a sharp, piercing pain that pierced her entire body, but did not break her fighting spirit and unbending determination to get up. The white wolf's paw stepped forward, and the black, sharp, and shiny claws flashed in the dim and gloomy light, as if threatening to deal a fatal blow to anyone who dared to approach, filling the air with a thick sense of danger and an inevitable mortal battle. Rosetta Carcel barely managed to dodge the deadly sharp claws when the beast almost stepped on her, displaying incredible agility, speed, and survival instinct that made her heart beat faster and her thoughts focus on the next agile and decisive move. A woman's foot in a graceful and delicate blue shoe rose smoothly and gracefully upward, ready for the next decisive blow or deft maneuver, as if grace, strength, and will itself were embodied in this tense moment, standing on the brink of life and death. Without thinking twice and without wasting a single second of precious time, she pushed the monster away from her with a sharp and confident movement with her strong foot, and the beast, having lost its support, fell to the ground with a loud crash, as if defeated by the power of her will and determination. Rosetta Carcel had won a resounding victory. The werewolf lying on the cold floor was stunned and amazed that such a small, seemingly fragile woman could defeat him and break his fierce spirit with her fearlessness and power. Realizing that her large and strong pet was no longer able to stand on its paws and move independently, the girl deftly and with surprising ease lifted it onto her shoulder, threw it over, and, carrying the weight, confidently headed back home along the narrow and winding road. She continued to walk forward confidently, proudly and firmly carrying the wolf on her shoulders, as if it were a light, barely perceptible load, and her inner strength and unyielding will seemed endless, filling her soul with confidence and unshakable fortitude even in the most difficult trials of fate. The maids and servants, standing aside and watching this scene from afar, were deeply amazed and in complete shock, overcome with sincere admiration and awe before the incredible strength and courage of their mistress, whose spirit and body seemed as if created for the greatest feats. The beautiful Renoa, with a joyful glow on his face, loudly clapped his hands, and his pride for his brave and courageous little sister sounded in every word he said, because he knew that she was the real heroine, causing admiration and pride in his heart. When asked what exactly he was doing there, the rude young man answered the sweet girl with some irony and insolence that he had decided to stay and watch carefully how two fierce dogs fought each other uncompromisingly, demonstrating their fury and strength. Then the young man, without stopping, slowly walked away, lightly waving his palm in the air, accompanying the gesture with a smile, calling on his sister to watch his faithful pet with special attention, although his words clearly caused irritation and indignation in the magnificent lady. Without further ado, as if on command, the strict and decisive Rosetta Carcel, with the composure of a ruler, ordered her maid to immediately bring the doctor to the room where her wolf lay, so that he could provide the necessary assistance and alleviate the animal's suffering. The irritated beauty stepped forward with a slight annoyance on her sweet face and muttered that her pet had created real chaos in the corridor. Everything was torn, broken, and scattered in disarray, as if a storm had swept through this place without the slightest doubt. After these words, Rosetta Carcel again, with determination and cold confidence, locked the werewolf in the cage, not allowing the slightest possibility of a repetition of the incident, in order to control the situation and maintain order in her domain, despite all the strength of the creature. Her hands stopped at the lock, and to her surprise, it was strangely intact and not broken, which was very unusual considering how the monster had managed to get out that time, overcoming all the obstacles and restrictions, which made her think about something much deeper. Kneeling down, Rosetta Carcel carefully asked the werewolf to lower his head and tell him honestly how exactly he managed to escape, trying to understand the weak point in the guard and the reasons for the escape, hoping to find an answer to this mysterious incident. With a slight smile, she silenced him, not giving him a word in response, as if playing a silent game where tension hung in the air and unspoken words seemed more important than any explanation, leaving the situation unresolved and even more mysterious. The werewolf no longer saw her as food or an enemy, for she had once defeated him, and now, overcome with sadness and fear, he knelt down, trembling before her, as if recognizing her power and his vulnerability, which made Rosetta's heart clench with strange feelings. Ultimately, the culprit of the wolf's escape was a servant who secretly brought him meat, thereby unwittingly helping him gain strength and the opportunity to escape, which led to serious consequences that no one suspected until the truth came out. Among the many toys and trinkets given to him by the monster, one particularly valuable thing stood out, a diamond decoration, sparkling like a small star, holding a secret and causing envy in many who only looked at it. The maid, without thinking long and forgetting about everything around her, quietly and carefully opened the door, driven by greed and avarice to steal the jewel for herself, not realizing that her thoughtless act would lead to unpredictable consequences and become the reason for the wolf's unexpected escape from captivity. The wolf, instantly sensing the opportunity presented to him, and without losing a second, deftly broke free from his confinement and quickly disappeared into the night, taking advantage of this rare weakness in the guards, which was revealed thanks to the reckless and risky act of the maid. Renoa, having learned of what had happened and having thought deeply about the situation, folded his arms across his chest and firmly insisted that the girl's hand had been cut off, although such cruelty seemed too severe and incredible, even for the most gloomy and alarming assumptions, which caused great alarm in all those present. Upset and worried, Rosetta Carcel seriously thought that perhaps her brother would secretly punish the maid severely and mercilessly, given his difficult, gloomy, and sometimes cruel character, which made her heart anxiously and painfully squeeze with a premonition of upcoming difficult events. The lady confidently and calmly extended her hand forward and, with a light but firm command in her voice, demanded that the wolf give her paw, thereby demonstrating power, trying to establish mutual understanding with him and establish control, despite the recent unpleasant incidents and tension in the relationship between them. Exactly a week had passed since the incident, and Rosetta Carcel continued to diligently and patiently train her pet, persistently guiding him and developing obedience, although he still looked at her with a certain amount of mistrust and caution, as if remembering past grievances. When the monster finally obediently did as she asked and gave him his paw, she gently and tenderly stroked his thick fur and with a smile quietly but sincerely said that he was a good boy, thus encouraging his efforts and gradually strengthening the trust and closeness between them, despite all the trials and difficulties. As a well-deserved and long-awaited reward, the lady carefully and gracefully served him the meat on a thin, elegant plate, as if tenderly noting his obedience and sincere efforts, wanting to strengthen his trust and express her warm affection for the pet, who was increasingly becoming an integral part of her life and soul. Sihail von Idris, without a second's hesitation, as if forgetting about everything around him, fell to his knees and began to greedily and uncontrollably eat meat straight from the floor, like the wild beast that he was in the depths of his soul, vividly demonstrating that primordial nature and unbridled instincts. The noblewoman, frowning at his behavior, noted with some satisfaction and alarm that the training with this beast was progressing very well, and gradually he became more tame, yielding to her will and training, despite his inner wildness. However, despite the success, it was noticeable that the big wolf had begun to noticeably gain weight. His sides had become rounded, and his belly was hanging down slightly, which worried the lady a little because it spoke of changes in his habits and lifestyle, which he still needed to get used to. The sunset majestically painted the cloudless sky in soft, flowing shades of pink, purple, and warm golden yellow, as if a skilled artist was slowly spreading paints on a huge canvas, creating a magical and peaceful atmosphere before the onset of a mysterious night. The werewolf settled down on the cold floor lazily and with obvious fatigue, showing absolutely no desire to move, stir, or even get up, as if all of nature and time itself were calling him to deep rest and long-awaited peace on this quiet and calm evening. Rosetta Carcel grabbed the wolf sharply by his obviously plump and fattened belly, and with a hint of obvious displeasure but at the same time concern, grumbled and insistently said that he had grown too fat, and he should definitely take care of himself and urgently lose weight in order to regain his former agility and strength. Taking her words as a sharp insult and an open challenge, the werewolf barked sharply and loudly in an angry and threatening voice, expressing his deep discontent and vivid protest, as if warning that he had not yet lost his fighting spirit and was ready to fight to defend his dignity and freedom. His face expressed confusion, deep sadness, and quiet anger at the same time, as if he suddenly realized and felt every painful word when he was called fat, and it touched him to the very depths of his soul, awakening in him an internal struggle and bitterness from the truth he heard. In her mind, the maiden sincerely and regretfully apologized to the beast for her excessive harshness and severity, feeling that she had been too cruel to him, but then she softened and smiled warmly, trying to show that her words came from care and good, sincere intentions, and not from a desire to offend him. The white, spacious, and majestic house was immersed in the evening silence and enchanting beauty, enveloped in the soft golden light of the sunset, which was playfully reflected in its large windows, creating an atmosphere of coziness, warmth, and tranquility, as if inviting everyone to come in and forget about the outside world. The long, dimly and subduedly lit corridor was decorated with snow-white windows with thin, slightly swaying curtains, and next to them stood elegant red armchairs with velvet upholstery, giving the room an aristocratic charm, sophistication, and subtle elegance, emphasizing the status. Rosetta Carcel walked forward confidently and gracefully, dressed in a short emerald green dress, and behind her the beast obediently trembled and impatiently pulled itself up, as if silently urging its mistress to move forward, without stopping or giving up halfway, showing faithful devotion. Understanding what the wolf wanted to say with his behavior, she slowly and carefully extended her hand to the muzzle that hung on the wall, as if preparing for the upcoming walk, but at the same time internally hesitated, realizing that it would not be as easy as it seemed at first glance. With a slight smile on her soft lips and sternly but gently, she told him that if he really wanted to go outside and feel the long-awaited freedom, then he would have to be patient and wait a little, after which the wolf turned away sadly and upset, hiding his obvious discontent and disappointment. Around them stretched a dense, picturesque forest with tall, slender trees, emerald vegetation, and lush, rustling foliage, where fresh, cool air filled the lungs with the aroma of damp earth and wild flowers, creating a feeling of living nature, peace, and tranquility. The werewolf, wearing an iron muzzle, slowly sniffed the flowers, walked through the clear meadow, and sincerely rejoiced at every moment of freedom, enjoying the simple pleasures of nature, which seemed especially bright and significant to him at that moment. The lady watched in horror as her huge pet instinctively marked his territory, following his natural, deep instincts, demonstrating his connection with the wild side, and at the same time showing care and protection that even she herself felt. However, holding the leash in her hands, Rosetta Carcel could not understand why her animal constantly looked back at her, as if checking her reaction, or looking for confirmation of trust in her gaze, forcing the lady to think about the hidden feelings and motives of her pet. Suddenly a great realization came to her, and her eyes widened in surprise and shock as the deeper meaning of what was happening finally dawned on her, and she realized how seriously and devotedly her pet was ready to protect her in any situation. An ancient book she had once read had written that such a penetrating and wary look from an animal always symbolized its readiness to become an unwavering defense for its defenseless owner, to stand guard and protect from any threat, regardless of the cost. With a firm and confident smile, the lady resolutely and convincingly said that she would definitely protect her devoted pet, so that he would not doubt anything and would not experience the slightest fear in the face of any, even the most dangerous and unpredictable life situations. However, her words clearly did not convince the wolf, and he dejectedly continued on his way without turning around and as if trying to hide his true feelings, hiding behind a cold mask of indifference, alienation, and inner pain that rarely anyone could see. Covering her mouth with her hand, Rosetta Carcel thought that perhaps her beast was simply embarrassed by his own fears, embarrassed in front of her, which is why he behaved so reservedly and withdrawn, not showing weakness and vulnerability, which made him even more mysterious. Suddenly, the leash unexpectedly slipped out of the small hand, as if it decided to disturb the peace and order, causing an immediate reaction and tension on both sides, causing the lady's heart to beat faster from the surprise and anxiety that gripped her. Without thinking twice or wasting a second, Rosetta Carcel quickly grabbed the leash by the handle back and sternly ordered the wolf to stop, so that he would not run away far and get into a dangerous situation while trying to maintain control over his unruly and wayward pet. She firmly and persistently repeated the command to stay put, but the stubborn and wayward animal categorically did not obey, continuing to run forward, which is why she still had to quickly run after him, not wanting to lose sight of her pet and sincerely worried about his safety and health. Suddenly, the monster began to bark aggressively, stopped abruptly, and looked up somewhere, as if it sensed some kind of threat or was interested in an unusual object, which instantly attracted the attention of both her and those around her, making her heart beat faster from surprise. It turned out that the wolf began to bark loudly and persistently at a crow that was sitting on a branch high in the thick green trees, watching them closely, and Rosetta Carcel looked at this scene with sadness and slight anxiety, realizing that today, not everything would be simple, calm, and predictable. The lady slowly approached the wolf, gently began to stroke and carefully tug at his thick, silky fur, trying to calm and regain the attention of the unruly pet, who seemed immersed in his thoughts and detached from the world around him, as if lost in his feelings. However, quickly realizing that the monster was not going to listen to her kind words and behave calmly, Rosetta Carcel looked around with slight anxiety, and suddenly an unexpected but bold idea came to her. A strong stick from a tree was lying nearby, which could help her in this matter. She grabbed the stick and began waving it vigorously towards the crow, trying to scare the bird and make it leave the branch it was sitting on, thus creating a space of calm and safety for the wolf and herself in this difficult situation. The crow's gray eyes looked down attentively and slightly thoughtfully, as if she understood everything and was aware of the lady's intentions, showing neither fear nor desire to fly away, which made Rosetta think about the unusual wisdom and cunning of this bird at the moment. Rosetta Carcel frowned as she felt a dark, foreboding feeling slowly rise in her soul, like the shadow of an approaching storm, making her heart beat faster and sharpening every sense around her, as if warning of coming changes and unknown trials. When the lady vigorously struck the air with the stick, the bird flapped its strong wings and, with a loud flap, took off, disappearing behind the branches of the trees, as if dissolving into the blue sky with snow-white clouds, free and unattainable like majestic nature itself. The wolf instantly rushed in pursuit of the bird, which, hovering in the air, changed its trajectory every now and then, and he, relentlessly pursuing it, ran through the grass, tearing off leaves and trampling the ground, showing all his primordial wild nature and hunting instincts without looking back or fear. The aristocrat carefully approached the werewolf, trying to calm him down gently and patiently, although he growled and showed obvious discontent, internally struggling with his own fears and disobedience, as if not wanting to obey at this important and disturbing moment in his life. Above their heads stretched an endless blue sky, filled with gentle light, where snow-white clouds slowly floated like soft, fluffy islands, and in the distance a black crow spread its wings and quickly flew away into the endless expanses, dissolving among the bright shades of air. Meanwhile, the hands of the maid, with great care and precision, combed the thick and rich red hair of the mistress, giving it smoothness and shine, as if weaving a delicate cocoon of calm and beauty, in order to at least slightly relieve the tension and anxiety in the soul of her mistress. Later, they both sat down in a cozy room and began to carefully discuss the incident with the raven. Rosetta Carcel described in detail how the werewolf suddenly, almost uncontrollably, ran after the bird, seized by impulse. Marina, thinking out loud, suggested that the monster simply wanted to hunt. The lady, feeling uneasy, went to the beautiful room where her pet was kept, and there the maid gently opened the door, letting the mistress in, as if warning her that there was some kind of confusion and trouble inside, which alarmed her. In the room itself, broken glass was scattered across the floor, like traces of some recent disorder that foreshadowed unpleasant consequences and caused an anxious premonition in Rosetta Carcel, forcing her to peer warily into the surroundings with apprehension. Coming closer to the cage, she said sternly and condemningly, noticing the destruction around, that the wolf had clearly created real chaos here, disturbing the peace and order that had previously been carefully maintained in this room, and now everything looked completely different and ugly. Sitting inside his cage, the monster guiltily lowered his muzzle. His gaze was full of regret and humility, as if he understood that he had caused inconvenience and disappointment to his mistress, who was now experiencing mixed feelings between irritation, concern, and anxiety. The girl, overcome with shock and deep anxiety, happily remembered that in childhood her animal had been cruelly bullied by crows, which is why he retained a strong and deep fear of these birds, which now suddenly surfaced in his behavior and reactions to the environment. Excited and filled with sincere compassion, she carefully approached the cage and began to quietly and gently calm the animal, tenderly saying that everything was okay now and no one would harm him, wanting to convey through her words care, protection, and support so that he felt completely safe. Coming closer to the cage, she gently asked him to come closer to her, as if inviting him to trust and get rid of anxiety and fear in order to regain peace and confidence in their difficult but strong connection between the owner and her unusual pet. With her arms spread out to the sides, with a warm and sincere smile and a gentle, understanding look, the girl began to talk about how good and obedient he was, trying to emphasize his positive qualities and instill in him the confidence that he was loved, valuable, and dear despite all the difficulties. However, the wolf only coolly galloped past her, awkwardly lowering his head and disappearing into the distance, and the girl remained standing with her arms outstretched to the sides, as if trying to hold on to something irrevocable, feeling slightly confused and helpless from his departure. The veins appeared on the noblewoman's face, and she froze in irritation at the dog's cunning and stubbornness, realizing that despite all her care, the beast retained its own will and pride, which were difficult to break or tame completely, adding tension to their difficult relationship. Hale, meanwhile, remained quiet and calm in the girl's room, sitting on the bed obediently and patiently, as if waiting for the moment when his mistress would be able to understand and accept his peculiarities, showing obedience and trust, which were not always easy for him to achieve. While the girl was thinking about how the werewolf looked rather cute and defenseless in his natural state, the maid, standing aside, judged what had happened in her own way, considering the dog's act mean and selfish, which added to the internal conflict and mistrust between people and the beast. A new soft pillow was thrown on the floor in a sign of irritation and disappointment, as if reflecting the tense atmosphere and internal contradiction that reigned in the room, where feelings of affection and alienation, care and stubbornness, closeness and misunderstanding coexisted. Hale settled softly on the floor, lowering himself in front of his owner, who gently and warmly beckoned him to sit next to her, demonstrating her deep trust and sincere desire to establish a strong connection, despite all the fears and doubts around them. The maid, with persistence and concern in her voice, tried to convince her mistress not to approach the wolf, warning her of possible danger and risks, but the lady, guided by her intuition and inner strength, stubbornly ignored all warnings and doubts. Frowning, young Marina insisted that at least an iron muzzle should have been placed on the werewolf to protect herself and those around her, considering it a reasonable precaution that could have prevented trouble. However, the noblewoman raised her finger, as if interrupting the maid's arguments, and confidently stated that Hale knew his place perfectly well, respected her, and would not cause her any harm, so there was no need to worry at all, because a special connection and mutual understanding had already developed between them. At the foot of the immaculately whitewashed wall, like a shining canvas of morning light, a luxurious scarlet carpet is spread out, shimmering with deep ruby overflows and inviting one to imagine a ceremonial entrance to a mysterious palace full of secrets and premonitions. A slender female hand, adorned with an elegant bracelet, slowly grasped a warm porcelain cup of aromatic amber tea, from which rose a gentle steam with hints of jasmine and honey, promising comfort and the quiet joy of a serene coming morning. Renoa noted with a surprised smile that now his sweet little sister takes her devoted dog everywhere every day, and he, like a living shadow, does not leave her side for a single step, guarding her sincere joy and reflecting the unconditional devotion of a loving heart. In the cozy dining room, where a brother and sister sat at a neatly set table, and a gray wolf lay at their feet, the elegant lady calmly explained to the young man that she lets her unusual pet out into the yard only on dark, moonless nights, respecting his freedom. Taking a fresh cup of aromatic tea in his palms from which light steam rose, Renoa, with a hint of irritation in his voice, asked the girl sitting opposite him where his former sister had gone, the one who had previously treated animals cruelly for their supposed strengthening. Slowly raising the cup to her lips, the girl closed her eyes for a moment, as if distancing herself from what was happening, and then with quiet confidence said that she had changed forever, realizing how cruel and blinded she had been before in her desire to control weakness. The young man suddenly began to cough violently, put the cup aside, and, clasping his hands, loudly shouted that he did not recognize his sister at all. Her behavior had become frighteningly calm, even alien, and, raising his eyebrows, he asked in panic if she had been poisoned by this strange tea. Leaping up from the table with fury in her eyes and flushed cheeks, the girl pointed a defiant finger at her brother, accusing him of rudeness, prejudice, and heartlessness, and then angrily screamed at her faithful wolf named Hale to bite the insolent man for such offensive words. Meanwhile, in the silence of the house, a dull but distinct sound was heard. Someone behind the door, with cold determination, knocked 3 times with his knuckles, and in this measured, confident knock there was a premonition of change, ready to burst into the heated atmosphere of the room. The brother and sister rose almost simultaneously from their seats in the spacious room, looked at each other with slight surprise, and, exchanging brief glances, allowed the mysterious guest to enter, as if sensing in advance that his arrival would bring important changes. Rosetta Carcel, standing a little to the side, froze in complete amazement. Her eyes widened and her lips involuntarily parted when she recognized the person who had entered, because she had not expected such a visit even in her wildest thoughts or anxious dreams. A handsome young man walked in gracefully, his blue hair neatly styled, his glasses elegantly perched on the bridge of his nose, and his slender figure framed by a perfectly fitting black suit. His name was Baron Paliar, and he was one of the loyal vassals of the Grand Duchy. Baron Paliar, slightly embarrassed, approached the table, sat down on a free chair with dignity, but also with the modesty characteristic of a true aristocrat, and looking around at those present with his violet eyes, greeted the hosts in a soft, almost musical voice. Baron Paliar lowered his head and suddenly raised his gaze warily, and with a barely noticeable tension in his voice, noted that he had not previously even suspected the presence of such a dangerous and impressive creature in the house as their snow-white wolf with an icy gaze turned out to be. The handsome baron was the embodiment of the ideal vassal of the duchy. Stately, collected, in an impeccably ironed white suit, strict and extremely attentive, he radiated the cold dignity and calm confidence of a man accustomed to holding power in his hands. Despite his manners and title, the noblewoman often openly ignored Paliar, either demonstratively covering her ears with her hands or turning away from his endless moralizing, being tired of his constant grumbling and inappropriate comments. Suddenly, the baron froze in place. In front of him, ears pressed menacingly and fangs bared, stood a werewolf, growling dully and drilling him with an angry look. A tense silence reigned in the room, in which both creatures looked at each other, ready for any outcome. With a slight, almost playful smile on her face, the aristocrat introduced the formidable werewolf as her personal pet, as if it were just a tame poodle. Only after her words did the tension in the air ease a little, and Baron Paliar breathed a sigh of relief, not taking his eyes off the monster. Beads of sweat appeared on the girl's forehead, and, wiping her temples with a handkerchief, she suddenly noticed how wary and internally tense their guest remained, as if he had sensed or caught something in what was happening that caused him hidden anxiety and doubt. The other servants standing along the walls also looked worried. Their backs were straightened to the limit, their hands were clenched, and their gazes darted between the werewolf and the baron, as if each of them expected that something irreversible and dangerous could happen at any moment. In an attempt to diffuse the situation and return the conversation to a safer channel, the charming Baron Paliar suddenly coughed into his fist, pretended to want to change the subject, and began talking about the famous young master he had mentioned earlier, trying not to look at the wolf. With a restrained, almost ceremonial gesture, Baron Paliar extended his hand forward and carefully placed a precious stone on the center of the table, a shining white diamond, shimmering with thin sparks of light, as if it had captured within itself the reflections of the starry sky. The young girl, whose attention had previously been scattered, involuntarily looked down and froze in surprise when she saw the rarest gemstone. Her breath caught, because such stones were found only in legends and belonged to the most ancient dynasties. Sitting up a little straighter, Baron Paliar began to tell them that before them was precisely the rare diamond he had mentioned a week ago, speaking with respect and awe. It was the last stone of its kind, almost mythical, inherited by him through a secret channel. Rosetta Carcel slowly tilted her head to the side, frowning slightly as if she didn't fully understand what was happening, and felt a strange, almost mournful atmosphere fill the room, as if behind the outer shine of the stone there was hidden someone's lost history. Taking the diamond in her graceful fingers, the girl slowly turned it in her palm, and, admiring the sparkling facets, said with a slight smile that if this stone really was the rare artifact that the legends spoke of, then it would undoubtedly bring them great wealth. The guys sitting next to her suddenly leaned forward, almost simultaneously leaning towards her and asking in surprise how she suddenly decided that the diamond had magical properties, because before that none of them had ever heard even a hint of the magical nature of the stone. Rosetta Carcel's mouth dropped open in surprise, her eyes widened, and her face showed genuine shock. Only at that moment did it dawn on her that, according to the course of events, the boys did not even know about the existence of magic yet, and she, in fact, gave them an important secret too early. Usually, as the young girl noticed, all the magic stones glowed with a soft blue glow. This was their usual recognizable shade, indicating the presence of magic, and no other color had ever been associated with the magical nature of the artifacts. Clutching a snow-white diamond shard in her hand, Rosetta Carcel calmly explained that the lack of glow did not mean that the stone was devoid of magic. Most likely, it simply had not yet been awakened or activated properly through processing or spell work. When asked directly how she knew about such details, Rosetta smiled reservedly and replied that she once had a good friend, a wizard, with whom she often talked about magic, the properties of artifacts, and other mysterious matters. Baron Paliar, slightly raising an eyebrow, nodded in agreement and added that he did indeed remember how a year ago a certain noble lady actively financed the research of a famous magician. Rosetta immediately picked up his words and confirmed it was that magician who told her everything. The guys quietly agreed among themselves to carefully check Rosetta's words to make sure whether this stone really has magical powers, because such things often turn out to be a deception or a legend that you really want to check in person and without doubt. Suddenly the Baron, smiling slightly and with a slight nostalgia in his voice, noticed that he was sincerely glad about the noticeable changes in the lady. Now she seemed to have become different, better than before, because before her behavior brought only problems and doubts. But now she looked much more confident and wiser, as if she had matured. However, the man soon began to speak sadly and indistinctly. His words merged into a monotonous stream, from which it was difficult to grasp the meaning, which made the lady involuntarily shudder, feeling bored and irritated by the conversation with this man, who clearly did not know how to maintain a lively and interesting conversation with others. Even the snow-white wolf, unable to bear the long and tedious speeches, yawned lazily and widely, as if to show that his enormous patience was also at its limit, and that the words of the great baron were unlikely to excite or truly captivate anyone at this moment. Rosetta Carcel quietly approached the white wolf, and with a slight smile on her lips lied, confidently stating that her pet clearly needed to get some fresh air, after which she gently led him to the exit, although in fact this was only a convenient excuse to distract the attention of those present and change the course of events. Suddenly, Baron Paliar, holding a heavy book with ancient bindings in his hands, stopped her and calmly said that he would like to say something important, because his words could change the course of the conversation and make everyone present think seriously about the upcoming events and their consequences. At this point, the conversation in the room turned to a disturbing topic. Everyone was discussing the disappearance of the crown prince, whom they were now unsuccessfully trying to find, and the tension was growing with every minute, because the fate of the future duchy hung in the balance and time was slipping away. Renoa quietly noted that if the duke, his own brother, was indeed continuing to persistently search for the missing prince, then the rumors of his disappearance were not idle rumors, but rather an alarm signal that could soon change everything around them and turn their lives upside down forever. This was the biggest and most terrible problem. If suddenly everyone found out that the crown prince was actually the girl's pet, then he could be immediately killed without mercy, because this truth could cause large-scale panic and put the life of the young heir in mortal danger. In addition, the beast was securely restrained in a collar made of strong llamas, which did not allow it to run away or hide anywhere, and it did not have the slightest chance to escape from those who were looking for it, or, on the contrary, trying to destroy it, which made its position especially vulnerable and hopeless. Baron Paliar added that if the prince never showed up, he was unsure whether it was worth holding the Rosetta Carcel coming-of-age ceremony here at all, as the lack of an heir could have serious political consequences and cause chaos among the nobility. The young men silently watched the lady as she calmly walked away, thinking that after the words spoken she would be irritated and upset. But, contrary to expectations, she behaved with surprising calm and even determination, as if she had accepted her fate and was ready for any trials. Rosetta Carcel only calmly and confidently answered them, walking away, that she had changed, been reborn, and was now a completely different person, who was no longer the same as she had been before, as if the past had been left far behind, and a new strength and unshakable confidence had settled in her soul. as if she had once become so furiously angry that she could destroy the entire room in her anger, overturn the table and furniture, leaving behind real chaos and disorder, which reflected the full depth of her inner anger and confusion, like a storm in her soul. But now that her event had lost all meaning, she calmly and decisively walked away without looking back, and quietly closed the door behind her, as if deliberately closing the door to the past behind her, leaving all the pain and unnecessary memories behind forever. Leaning tiredly against the cold door, Rosetta closed her eyes, as if trying to collect her thoughts and find inner peace, and the white wolf sitting next to her calmly watched her, as if understanding her every word and experience without a single sound, radiating faithful support. The lady gently and affectionately stroked the monster's snow-white, soft fur, and suddenly quietly said that, despite all the trials and difficulties, he would soon be able to return home, to where he was sincerely awaited and loved, and where he would finally find the long-awaited peace and freedom. Snow-white, light and transparent curtains, gently fluttering in the warm wind, softly frame the huge windows of this majestic ancient mansion, letting light into the spacious halls, which seems to dance on the floors and walls, creating an atmosphere of lightness and grace. The blue, clear, and cloudless sky stretched above the tops of slender trees, where green foliage gently swayed in the light summer breeze, and the singing of birds filled the space with enchanting harmony, as if nature itself was preparing the stage for an unforgettable sunny day. The stubborn, determined, and unwavering girl, not wanting to give in, with firmness in her voice and gaze, answered her interlocutor that she would never sell anything for anything, defending her opinion with grace and unbending strength of character despite strong pressure and persistence. To the Baron's persistent, almost pleading requests to just look at the wolf, she responded without hesitation with a firm refusal, deftly turning around and confidently walking away with her faithful and devoted pet, as if deciding to leave all persuasion behind forever. They all began to argue heatedly and bitterly over her nasty and stubborn brother, the handsome Renoa, who had suddenly run away, leaving them alone in the most defenseless and difficult situation, causing anger, confusion, and mutual reproaches among all present. The lady confidently and casually picked up a bright red ball from a large wicker basket, in which both red and blue balls were neatly laid out, shimmering in the light and attracting attention with their rich, vibrant palette of bright colors. Then, as if playing and smiling cheerfully, she deftly threw 2 balls up at once and shouted loudly to her wolf, ordering him to catch them on the fly, expecting dexterity and quick reaction from her devoted and attentive pet in this funny and dynamic game. The sand, suddenly raised up by the sharp movement, unexpectedly flew straight into the Baron's face, and he grimaced with obvious disgust and irritation, clearly dissatisfied with such an unpleasant and sudden surprise, which sharply disturbed his calm and mood. He grimaced in irritation and grimaced angrily, clearly experiencing strong and unpleasant discomfort caused by the fact that finely dispersed sand had gotten into his eyes and on his skin, preventing him from concentrating and causing a strong desire to quickly get rid of this irritating, annoying nuisance. The new, bright blue ball accidentally tipped over and fell behind a tall, decrepit wooden fence, after which it was thrown into the thick, tall grass, gradually disappearing from sight, as if forgotten and left aside in this noisy, bustling, and emotional moment of the game. Having caught up with the fallen bright red ball, the huge monster suddenly stopped, looking forward intently in the direction where the blue ball was flying rapidly, as if trying to understand and focus on the next action, carefully and cautiously watching what was happening around. Rudely and directly, with barely concealed irritation, the girl answered the Baron that her opinion completely coincided with his own view of the situation, and she, too, no longer wanted to see him around. Therefore, precisely for this reason, he should immediately and unconditionally leave, so as not to waste precious time. When the stubborn guy said that he was not going to leave under any circumstances, Rosetta Carcel turned around sharply and decisively and persistently asked why exactly he had made such an unyielding decision, demanding detailed explanations and not hiding her sincere surprise and obvious dissatisfaction with his stubbornness. The man calmly, and with a slight smile, explained that she had behaved very strangely and almost inappropriately at that moment, while he even knew that the magic stones could be irreversible and extremely dangerous, which made this situation even more serious and unpredictable for all the people around them. Firmly and confidently, she said with passion that it was she who had to take full responsibility for what had happened, bear all the grave consequences, and solve the problems that arose, despite all the difficulties and numerous doubts that arose on her path in this confusing and complex matter. Rosetta Carcel shrugged, calmly folding her arms across her chest, and openly stated that she had no understanding of business or financial matters, so she could not help him and did not intend to get involved in these complex, confusing, and difficult matters that were completely alien to her. Baron Paliar insistently and with a slight touch of respect repeated that he expected to hear her sincere opinion about the current and complicated situation. Now he rightfully considers her his expert in magic and hopes for her wise advice and deep knowledge in this difficult and responsible matter. Suddenly the wolf, as if instinctively sensing the tension of the moment and the changed atmosphere, made a powerful leap, lifting his paws off the ground with incredible ease and strength, preparing for a swift and sudden dash forward that made everyone present shudder in surprise. Concerned that she could not find her beloved and faithful pet anywhere, the lady turned around abruptly, rushing into a thorough search for him, sighing heavily and shaking her head in confusion and deep anxiety, not knowing where else to direct her gaze in this hopeless and alarming situation. Suddenly, her eyes widened in complete shock and deep bewilderment, unable to believe what had just happened, as if time had stopped for a moment, and she was trying to comprehend how something that seemed absolutely impossible could have happened so suddenly and so quickly. The werewolf quickly and silently jumped over the high moss-covered fence and disappeared without a trace, skillfully hiding in the thick darkness, escaping from sight, leaving behind only an alarming silence and a sense of impending danger hanging over everyone around at this tense moment. Baron Paliar and the girl simultaneously froze in place, seized with deep horror and complete confusion, because the dangerous and unpredictable wolf managed to escape right under their noses, leaving them in complete shock, confusion, and defenselessness in the face of the unknown. The lady, overcome by a strong, growing anxiety and chilling fear, screamed desperately, calling the wolf to her in a loud, piercing voice, full of excitement and despair, because something truly terrible, horrible, and irreversible could happen to him, which none of them could allow. Baron Paliar suddenly fell to the ground from a strong and unexpected push, feeling a sharp, piercing pain that quickly spread throughout his body, forcing him to barely maintain consciousness and furiously fight against increasing weakness and dizziness. The aristocrat, without wasting a minute, immediately rushed to run along with her faithful pet, resolutely and persistently intending to quickly find and return him back, not allowing fear and anxiety to paralyze her will and force her to abandon this important and responsible mission. Approaching the high wooden fence, she screamed loudly, begging the wolf to return immediately and without delay, reminding him that he was strictly forbidden to leave the mansion, because this could have serious and unpredictable consequences for everyone around him and for himself. Scary and disturbing thoughts swarmed through her head. What if the wolf was hit by a speeding carriage and the horses lost control and management? What would happen to him and those around him, and how to avoid this impending catastrophe, which could suddenly destroy their lives in one terrible moment? Or he might get lost in the dense, impassable thickets, faint from fatigue and fear, and then evil and cruel people might catch him and harm the defenseless creature, which would cause unbearable anxiety and deep concern to the sweet lady herself. Fear and great horror instantly gripped the girl's entire body, and she froze in an awkward pose with her trembling hands raised, as if trying to protect herself from an invisible and looming threat that seemed to be pressing on her at this difficult and dramatic moment. But then the wolf suddenly and unexpectedly returned, easily and swiftly jumping back over the high fence, holding his blue ball, his favorite toy, tightly in his teeth, and without wasting a second, ran straight to her, causing the lady to feel a wave of relief and sincere joy. The lady greeted her dear and beloved pet with trepidation and great, genuine joy, who seemed to be running right towards her, as if feeling her care and boundless love, filling her heart with warmth, hope, and comfort on this difficult and challenging day. A bright blue ball quickly jumped out of his open mouth, an important catch, which he carefully and thoughtfully brought to his mistress, as if wanting to show that he had returned with a valuable gift and had sincerely fulfilled his small but very significant mission. Rosetta Carcel sat down on the cold bench, tired and slightly relaxed, carefully examining the thing that had been brought to her, and thought to herself that this mysterious monster had simply brought her an abandoned, seemingly unnecessary thing that had a special and deep meaning for her. After this, the wolf approached her calmly and confidently, began to gently and affectionately rub against her soft clothing, as if he had long been accustomed to her touch and found in her the comfort and protection that were so important to him after the recent difficulties and worries he had experienced. Rosetta Carcel laughed with relief and sincerity, rejoicing from the bottom of her heart and soul that everything was all right with her dear and faithful pet, and that he was near her again, giving her a feeling of peace, warmth, and tender hope in her exhausted soul. But before, this mysterious and wayward monster had not been given to her so easily. He often stubbornly sat on the sidelines, far from everyone, avoiding showing any affection and trying to stay away from close contacts, which invariably upset and greatly confused the noblewoman herself. But now the noblewoman began to call her dog a good, obedient boy, with warmth and affection, because he finally behaved submissively and obediently, which could not help but bring a smile to her tired but grateful lips in this bright moment of joy and mutual understanding. Suddenly, the wolf suddenly and with unexpected force rushed at her with a playful jump, and the lady recoiled sharply, surprised by such a sharp and spontaneous reaction of her pet, who, as if forgetting all the rules of decency, decided to show her his tenderness and sincere affection. The monster, ignoring her persistent attempts to push him away, sat right on her lap and began to cuddle like a little puppy, and young Rosetta Carcel desperately tried to throw him off herself, but he turned out to be too heavy, stubborn, and strong to simply give up his place to her. The Baron bent over them quickly and fearfully, afraid that such a sudden and too strong contact could cause unexpected harm to the lady, and anxiously watched every movement of the animal, trying to prevent possible unexpected danger. However, the sweet Rosetta Carcel only calmly and tenderly stroked the wolf's thick and soft fur, and then threw the Baron a surprised and slightly playful look, saying with a slight smile that she thought he had already left a long time ago, not expecting his sudden return at this very moment. But then the adult man, after a slight hesitation, carefully handed her the important papers, saying that he wanted to personally hand them to her, and the lady accepted them with surprise and slight excitement, trying to understand what exactly was hidden inside this unexpected message. Taking the documents in her hands, the beautiful lady settled down on the soft grass and began to read carefully, turning over the ancient pages, filled with intricate details and delicate patterns that gave the entire letter a special significance and importance. According to the contents of the documents, the jewels, made of rare and valuable stones, were to be sent to the duchy's jewelry store, where their value would be recognized and appreciated, which would promise considerable profit and benefit for all interested parties. On the back of this paper there was another text, and the Baron insistently asked the lady to read it carefully because it contained important information that could change the understanding of the whole situation and influence further decisions. The lady thought about the offer, wondering how profitable and interesting it was. After all, she was offered a lot of money and the opportunity to transform ordinary mana into magic stones, which promised to open new horizons and prospects in the world of magic and wealth. The lady, with slight interest and a barely noticeable smile, asked if the guy had any more questions, to which he calmly and confidently replied that even an experienced master would not always take on such a complex and very responsible task, requiring special knowledge and great caution. Rosetta Carcel thought deeply about this tempting offer because the amount in question could become her future pension and provide the long-awaited peace and stability for many years to come, which she so lacked in this unpredictable and changeable world. Suddenly the beauty spoke decisively and firmly, suggesting that the Baron immediately contact a master named Asilla, a skilled and talented jeweler who was famous for her unrivaled skill and could easily bring to life even the most complex and unusual ideas. In the past, when one of the most famous countesses shone at a ball in an insanely expensive and exquisite necklace, all the guests could not take their eyes off this magical piece of jewelry, which was a real masterpiece of jewelry art and caused admiration among all those present. The Baron opened his eyes wide in surprise, hardly believing his ears, because he also knew well about that very precious and rare decoration, about which there were legends among noble persons and connoisseurs of magic. This beautiful necklace was a true rarity and the envy of many. The necklace was made of a magical, shining orange stone. Expensive and skillfully crafted, it instantly attracted attention with its unusual shine and mysterious energy, as if it kept the secrets and power of ancient magicians, which made it unique and priceless. Under the blue sky and in the shade of young trees, the assembled young people were animatedly discussing that it was the talented Asilla who had created this magnificent decoration. But at the same time, she had tried with all her might to maintain her anonymity, not wanting to reveal her name and remaining in the shadow of fame. With her arms folded across her chest and maintaining a confident and calm appearance, the girl confidently spoke about the master jeweler, emphasizing his high professionalism and the extraordinary skill he possessed, arousing respect and admiration among the listeners. In the original, Rosetta Carcel loved rare and exquisite jewelry, so when she learned about the Countess's legendary necklace, she did not hesitate to immediately send her loyal people to find the master who created this masterpiece, wanting to acquire his talent and services for herself. The Baron smiled happily and broadly upon hearing this long-awaited news, sincerely rejoicing and anticipating the opportunity to become a direct witness to this important, long-awaited and significant event associated with the search for the master, about whom legends circulated in the highest circles of society. However, his face quickly became serious, and even a little gloomy when he learned that the jeweler often refused many people and did not give his consent to create jewelry to everyone, which made his services especially rare and desirable, and gave him an aura of mystery and inaccessibility. The woman with gray hair, like silver frost, has more than once consciously exposed herself to various dangers and trials with her skills and craft, but thanks to her natural talent and tenacity, she managed to gain respect and deserved recognition among colleagues and demanding customers. Clenching his hands tightly into strong fists in front of him, the Baron said loudly and decisively that he would do everything exactly as Rosetta Carcel had instructed, expressing at the same time obvious deep satisfaction and confidence in the success of the upcoming important matter and new beginnings. The girl, with a light and confident smile, calmly and confidently finished the conversation with the guy, not without dignity, firmly ordering him to leave, since he had said everything he wanted, thereby showing her firm, decisive decision, independence, and inner strength of character. The young Baron took one confident step back, his shiny black mirror-like patent leather shoes lightly touching the soft green grass, creating a quiet but distinct sound in the silence of the surrounding, calm and peaceful garden. The Duchess, as if enjoying every moment, slowly, with grace and warmth in her eyes, walked back to her pet, smiling tenderly at him and gently running her hand over his soft fur, as if wanting to convey all her love and care through this simple gesture. The man, hiding in the shadows, quietly and unnoticed, watched the incredible transformation of the noble woman, who looked completely different, contented, calm and peaceful, as if she had found long-awaited happiness, which was reflected in the sincere and rare smile on her face. Suddenly his eyes widened in surprise, and his mouth involuntarily dropped open from the unexpected and stunning shock that suddenly burst into his consciousness and made his heart beat faster from shock and unexpected deep emotions and excitement. He suddenly remembered how the lady affectionately called her pet by his sweet nickname, and this warm address awakened in his memory something important and long forgotten, like a key to a mysterious secret that again began to take on clear and vivid outlines in his mind and deep heart. Then he remembered the words of the Duke, who said that his daughter was just having fun in her youth, but would soon grow up, become wise and gain true intelligence, capable of understanding deep truths and making important life decisions in her destiny. The Baron suddenly realized that he had been deeply mistaken in looking down on the Duchess. Before him suddenly appeared not a stupid girl, but an intelligent and mature woman with a deep understanding of life and her own strength, worthy of sincere respect and admiration. With a slightly thoughtful smile, he cast a final farewell glance at her, softly adding to himself that it would be a good idea to teach her the basics of management next time, so that her strength and intelligence would become even more impressive and extremely useful in the future. In the evening, in the long corridor of the mansion, an old lamp burned softly and warmly, illuminating the snow-white walls, decorated with elegant decor, creating an atmosphere of comfort and luxury, where every detail spoke of the wealth, sophistication, and refined taste of the house, filled with many years of history. Sweet Rosetta Carcel lay tiredly on her soft bed after an exhausting and eventful day, and next to her sat her faithful wolf, quietly snoring and protecting her with his calm, reliable presence and devoted devotion. She recalled with slight irritation and inner discontent the impudent Baron who had tired her out all day with his drawn-out conversations and endless nagging, leaving a feeling of fatigue, irritation, and barely hidden discontent in her soul. The snake werewolf, sensing his mistress's deep anxiety, came closer and gently pressed himself against her leg, looking at her attentively and with sincere care, as if trying to convey his calmness and confidence in order to support and comfort her in this difficult moment of anxiety and fatigue. Realizing that her loyal and devoted pet was trying to calm and encourage her, Rosetta Carcel sincerely thanked him for his care and tenderness, slowly rose from the bed and settled down more comfortably on the bright red sheet, feeling how peace and inner warmth gradually returned. Suddenly, Hale barked loudly and sharply, as if responding to the lady's words. His voice sounded excited and wary, expressing inner tension and anxiety, which further emphasized his devotion and protective readiness in the face of possible danger and the unknown. The noblewoman, a little agitated but already feeling calm next to her pets, lay back down in bed, turned off the soft light of the lamp, and, covering herself with a warm blanket, tenderly wished her faithful and beloved companions a calm and peaceful night, plunging into a world of pleasant dreams and silence. The entire room was shrouded in a thick and dense darkness, which, like a velvet cloak, enveloped every detail of the luxurious furniture, creating an atmosphere of deep nocturnal mystery, in which even the slightest sound seemed unusually loud and significant. Suddenly, the silence of the night was cut by a sudden and powerful bark that burst from the wolf's chest. His voice echoed through the dark corners of the room, filling the space with energy and tension, as if warning of impending danger or calling for immediate action. Sleepily and with obvious irritation, the girl slowly opened her eyes, tossing and turning from the unexpected awakening that disturbed her peace and quiet, and at that moment she felt her thoughts begin to clear, trying to understand the source of this sudden noise and disturbance. Suddenly, her gaze focused on Hale, who was already engaged in a fierce battle with the mysterious men in black robes, the mercenaries who had entered her room with the clear intention of causing harm, causing a wave of anxiety and deep fear within her. In complete shock and numbness, the noblewoman suddenly realized the terrible and unexpected truth. Real professional killers had been sent to her, secretly sent to mercilessly eliminate her, and this sudden realization caused a chill of horror to penetrate her entire body. One of the men, in a long black cloak, suddenly approached her with a threatening and sinister confidence, raising his hand in a gesture full of malice and the obvious intention of causing unbearable pain, forcing the noblewoman to feel the full weight of the mortal danger hanging over her at this critical moment. But then suddenly, as if from the shadows, Hale appeared from behind, barking loudly, desperately defending his mistress and demonstrating his readiness to attack at any second without hesitation anyone who dared to harm her, showing his loyal devotion and determination to stand guard over her safety. The lady, still sitting on the bed, with slight anxiety and a sincere sense of guilt, quietly asked her faithful pet for forgiveness for being slow in reacting, which almost got her killed, clearly realizing the full depth of the danger of the situation and the full responsibility for her life and destiny. With her fragile but determined hand, she reached for the beautiful sword, clutching the hilt tightly, fully prepared to fight back against these scoundrels, despite her fatigue and the unexpectedness of the attack, showing inner strength and courage at this critical moment. Seeing one of the assassins swinging to strike her faithful wolf, the lady quickly swung her blade, ready to repel the attack at any moment and protect her pet at any cost, showing incredible determination, fearlessness, and courage in battle. As a result of a fierce and merciless fight, all the villains were defeated, unconscious and spreading across the floor in their own blood, without the strength to continue resistance, like shadows that had disappeared forever from this ominous place. There were many of them, as many as 10 shadows of mercenaries, like dark ghosts, silently gliding around the room and ready to attack at any moment, but their number did not faze the two brave defenders, who steadfastly resisted and won despite everything. Facing off against each other, the mighty Hale and the brave girl with the blade showed unyielding will and determination. Their combined efforts and composure in battle allowed them to surpass numerous enemies and defeat the treacherous killers, which inspired respect and admiration. With blood streaming down her face, Rosetta, barely containing her cold rage, asked the defeated assassins who exactly sent them on this deadly mission, while threateningly looking at them with her wild, full of anger wolf eyes, as if foreshadowing a harsh reprisal. The men in black cloaks, overcome with deep fear and frozen by the tension of the moment, stood motionless and silent, like frozen shadows, stubbornly refusing to reveal their dark secrets and the names of those who stood behind this insidious attack. So the lady had no choice but to get rid of these threats forever. Red blood spilled on the floor, and her blade gleamed with a cold metallic light, symbolizing the determination and ruthlessness with which she would protect her life and honor. Rosetta lazily ran her hand over her cheeks, brushing away the dirt and fatigue that had stuck to her, and muttered irritably that she had been sleeping so soundly and sweetly, but that her sleep had suddenly been disturbed by uninvited noise and alarm, which had sharply worsened her mood and made her wary. Was looking at the balcony and the glowing moon in the dark night sky with a strange, almost wary expression, as if sensing an invisible threat or a mysterious secret hidden in the deep shadows. Darkness thickly enveloped the room, where the luxurious furniture was only vaguely discernible in the subdued, soft light of the night, creating an atmosphere of mysterious silence and majestic emptiness, as if the night itself guarded the peace of this mysterious and inaccessible space with its silence. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a loud, sharp bark. It was a wolf, whose piercing and insistent voice cut through the night's peace, causing the girl's heart to wake up and immediately become alert, because such a sound spoke of approaching alarm and impending danger. Frowning and squeezing her brows together, Rosetta instantly realized that Hale was consumed with rage and resentment towards the empress who had sent deadly assassins after him and was secretly watching them through a mysterious black crow, like a dark eye of the night. Without a second's hesitation, the girl abruptly threw the blade to the floor, clenched her fists tightly, and began to run, determined to break free from this nightmarish conspiracy and save herself from the inevitable, impending danger that hung over them like the shadow of death. The lady suddenly grabbed the gun, looked out of the window, peering tensely into the distance, as if ready to drive away an annoying bird that was disturbing her long-awaited peace, and with each passing moment she became more and more determined in her firm intention not to let it get close. The crow, as if sensing an invisible and inevitable threat above itself, flapped its powerful wings, ready to quickly rise into the air, avoiding the impending danger that came from the determined woman, who did not want to allow it to circle freely near the window. However, the bird did not even have time to take off. A sharp and loud shot rang out, and the lady, tightly clutching the gun, with cold and iron determination, aimed the bullet at the crow, which soon fell heavily down, landing lifelessly on the cold ground under the windows. The girl remained standing by the window, her cheeks stained with the scarlet and sticky blood of the bird, and her gaze acquired a dark, almost ominous frown, as if the weight of what she had done hung over her, leaving a bitter, painful aftertaste in her soul and in the deathly silence around her. And so it turned out that the empress, possessing great power and secret knowledge, used her familiars, ravens, as invisible and faithful spies to secretly follow every step of the prince, penetrating into the most secret and carefully hidden corners of his life and affairs. This evil woman, however, in her smug confidence and arrogance, was completely unprepared for the fact that an unexpected danger could arise in her own bird servants and that they could easily be shot at, thereby disrupting her fragile plans. Rosetta Carcel, feeling threatened and suddenly overcome with excitement, hurried back to her faithful and devoted white wolf, who was patiently waiting for her in the room, lying quietly on the floor, looking devotedly in her direction, as if understanding the full gravity of what was happening around her. Hugging her beast tightly and tenderly, she began to gently calm him with quiet words and gentle touches, assuring him that now everything would be fine, and together they would be able to survive this anxiety and the impending danger that had just pierced their fragile calm. After Rosetta Carcel carefully and tenderly ran her hand over the soft fur of her faithful beast, the lady noticed that her palms were covered in scarlet, thick blood, and horror instantly seized her heart. Her beloved pet was seriously injured and needed immediate help. The girl jerked back, overcome with shock and panic when she finally realized that her close friend had been hurt. It was a real horror that gripped her soul, causing her to feel deep anxiety, fear, and a complete sense of helplessness in the face of what had happened. Grabbing a bright red cloth, she quickly began to carefully wipe the blood from the beast's wound and immediately began to bandage it, trying not to cause him unnecessary pain, but decisively and skillfully acting to stop the bleeding and at least slightly ease his torment and suffering. Looking sadly and tenderly at her injured and faithful companion, Rosetta Carcel quietly said that the wound was received by him while protecting her from danger, and in her voice there was deep gratitude, sincere concern, and unwavering love for the faithful friend who was ready to give everything for her. Taking a deep, heavy breath, the girl whispered through clenched teeth and trembling lips that the wound of her faithful beast was caused precisely by her fault, and a painful feeling of guilt squeezed her heart, not allowing her to breathe calmly in this difficult and anxious moment, full of fear and pain. The wolf slowly approached her, gently pressing himself and caressing her tenderly, showing his sincere affection and care, as if he too keenly felt the anxiety and inner pain that tormented her exhausted soul, worrying about her and her fragile, weakened health. The noblewoman hastened to calm her friend with quiet and gentle words, as well as affectionate movements, assuring him that now it was she who would firmly protect and guard him from all possible dangers and adversities, and asked him not to worry in vain, so that he could feel her reliable strength and support. When suddenly Hale, who had been silent until then, suddenly spoke with an unexpected and serious intonation in his voice and asked her how exactly she was able to find out that the culprit of what had happened was the empress herself, the one who had long ago thrown so many dark secrets and deadly dangers into their lives. The lady froze in complete shock when she heard the werewolf speak to her in a human voice. She had no idea that he could understand her, and this stunning discovery shook her to the depths of her soul, leaving her bewildered and afraid at the same time. Without thinking twice, she abruptly tried to push the beast away from her when it seemed to be about to jump on her, causing her to panic and an instinctive desire to protect herself at any cost from the unpredictable and frightening creature nearby. The beauty stepped back in fear, worried and confused, thinking that she was going crazy. How could it seem to her that her faithful dog had suddenly spoken? Meanwhile, Hale, offended by her reaction, objected that he was not an ordinary dog at all, but a werewolf, deserving respect and understanding. However, in the original book, everything happened differently. The wolf did not have human intelligence and speech at the time when Lillian first met and tamed him, and their relationship was built solely on trust and mutual understanding without words, which made their connection especially touching and unique. Covering her mouth with a trembling and slightly damp hand, the lady tried to come to her senses, but her wide-open eyes still could not believe what she saw. Deep shock and strong bewilderment from what was happening filled her mind, preventing her from concentrating and finding at least some calm in this situation. Hale frowned, knitted his thick eyebrows, and again, with obvious impatience and insistence, repeated his serious question, demanding a direct and honest answer, not hiding his obvious dissatisfaction, as if he was tired of waiting for explanations and wanted to know the truth immediately and without any excuses. Suddenly he stepped with his heavy paws right on the lady, pressing her hard to the cold and hard floor with his weight, and in a stern voice asked how exactly she could have known that the evil empress had planned to assassinate him and had even carefully prepared his premeditated murder. The girl, overcome with both fear and determination, clenched her fist and struck the beast with great force, trying to push this dangerous and frightening monster away from herself, not wanting to submit, and allowing herself to show fierce resistance even in such a dangerous and almost hopeless situation. But when the beast flew back into the wall with force, the lady immediately apologized to him, feeling deep regret and realizing that she had gone too far in a fit of fear, because she did not want to cause him real pain or harm her faithful companion. Rosetta began to reproach herself for being a bad owner and not being able to handle the situation better, calling herself incapable of protecting someone dear to her, to which Hale responded that she had not treated him like an ordinary animal, but rather like a dog, showing care and attention, although sometimes too harshly. Irritated, Hale admitted that he himself did not understand how he was suddenly able to speak to her in a human voice, but at the same time he was still waiting for her to answer his important and disturbing question, and her long silence began to make him angry and impatient, as if fueling the tension between them. Meanwhile, the gun with which the lady had previously tried to scare away the bird was thrown onto the cold floor with carelessness and fatigue in its movements, as if becoming a symbol of her deep inner turmoil and the fact that at this anxious moment it had completely ceased to have any meaning for her. Stepping out onto the balcony, Rosetta, in a serious and collected voice, explained to the wolf standing next to her that she had known for a long time. The crows were the empress's servants, closely watching their every step and not missing the slightest detail of their actions and movements. Indifferently and with a slight hint of suspicion, the girl asked the beast if it accidentally belonged to the empress herself, wanting to understand who could be trusted and who could be an enemy, to which Hale angrily and categorically replied that he was completely unrelated to this cruel and insidious woman. Hale grimaced like a trained man, even while remaining in the form of a monster. His facial expression conveyed caustic irony and hidden irritation, as if he was displeased and wanted to show his superiority despite his bestial form. Irritated and stubborn, the girl turned away, showing steadfastness and even under threat of death refusing to reveal what exactly she knew, and that the crown prince, who had now become her true friend, was also involved in these intrigues, preferring to keep the secret at all costs. Suddenly, Hale, looking at her intensely with his deeply expressive eyes, loudly and confidently said that he knew who was really hiding behind the image of this mysterious and enigmatic lady, whose appearance concealed many secrets and complex destinies known only to a few. Everyone had long heard that the Duchess was a merciless dog of her kind, whom everyone feared without exception, because her cruelty was boundless, and traces of her presence left behind fear and anxiety, like a shadow haunting those who dared to oppose her. The wolf tensed up, gathering his inner strength, and suddenly declared that now the time had come to tell the lady one important and long-awaited truth about himself, which he had carefully hidden, because true friendship is impossible without honesty and trust, especially in this world of intrigue and danger. After a short pause, with pride and dignity in his voice, he confessed that he was not just a beast, but a true prince of the great empire, and his name was Sihael von Idris, opening before her a new page of their destiny, full of mysteries, hopes, and trials that they would have to go through together. Rosetta froze, as if time had stopped for a moment, as the man slowly and decisively revealed to her the truth about who he really was, and this unexpected news deeply shook her inner world, making her heart beat faster with surprise and anxiety. She tried to hide her true astonishment, skillfully feigning surprise as if she were hearing about it for the first time, trying not to show the slightest doubt or fear, so as not to show the man how much his revelation had changed her perception of everything happening around her. Clutching her head, the noblewoman felt a growing panic, not knowing how to properly conduct a conversation with the prince and what to do now with the secret he had revealed, which had turned her ideas about the world upside down, becoming a heavy burden on her fragile shoulders and awakening a mass of conflicting feelings. The wolf, noticing her confusion, immediately calmed her down gently with assurances of his complete trust, emphasizing that she was the only one to whom he could now allow himself to open up and in whom he saw a true ally, ready to share with him all the secrets and trials of fate. Rosetta honestly admitted that the air was too familiar, and this made her doubt his sincerity and true intentions, because behind the superficial ease she could not immediately discern the real motives and feelings hidden deep inside his soul. Sihael von Idris calmly and with a slight smile replied that he knew very well about her strong and unyielding character, after which he asked with sincere interest how she had ended up in his duchy, which hinted at the beginning of a new important conversation between them. Surprised and alarmed, Rosetta stepped back, instantly realizing that the wolf had lost part of his memory, and an uneasy doubt arose in her heart. What was hidden behind this loss, and how it would affect their destinies now closely linked? Tilting his head to the side with a thoughtful expression, the prince gently asked what exactly the problem was, and tried to explain to her how he had ended up on these lands, telling her a story filled with riddles and a fog of forgotten memories that they had yet to unravel together. The noblewoman smiled a little tensely, then clapped her hands and sincerely thanked fate that the wolf did not remember that terrible moment when her brother stole her and brought her here for his evil amusement, reminding her of a past full of pain and betrayal that was difficult to get rid of. It was a cruel situation they were put in by both sides, circumstances full of pain and ruthlessness, for the cruel Renoa knew no mercy and mercilessly destroyed everything in its path, leaving behind only scars and bitterness in the hearts of those who remained alive. So, not daring to reveal the whole truth, she decided to tell the werewolf only a half-truth, carefully telling him that her brother had brought him here in a wounded state, without revealing all the dark details and intentions hidden behind this act. The prince asked warily if they had raised him with wicked intentions, if they had tried to use him for evil, if there had been any bad thoughts hidden in his upbringing that could turn him into a dangerous enemy or a traitor, causing a slight tension in the air between them with such a question. This outraged the lady, and she firmly and decisively stated that she raised him with the full dedication of her soul and heart, with the best intentions, without the slightest intention of harming or betraying him, because for her he was more than just an animal or a pet. She always carefully placed a huge plate of the finest and freshest meat before him, carefully selecting the quality and freshness to give him the best that a noblewoman could afford, thus expressing her love and respect for him. And even the big, terrible wolf slept on the softest and coziest pillow made of the finest fabric, which she saved to provide him with comfort and peace, demonstrating care and devotion that could not go unnoticed in their difficult fate. Moreover, every day she carefully took her pet out for a walk, carefully protecting his health and mood, paying attention to his every step and movement, so that he felt protected and loved in this restless and dangerous world full of secrets. Suddenly, the beast's tail began to twitch noticeably in different directions, expressing internal excitement and a lively response to what was happening around, as if he felt something important and incomprehensible that was hidden behind the words and looks of the interlocutors in this tense moment. Playfully and with a slight smile, Sihael von Idris, finally convinced of her sincerity and honesty, noted that various rumors were circulating around her about her depravity and dubious reputation, as if trying to test her fortitude and readiness to withstand the trials of life and betrayal. Rosetta suddenly trembled with rage when she realized that the wolf was mocking her and joking, testing her feelings and boldly provoking her to respond, awakening in her the fire of pride and determination not to succumb to his barbs and ridicule ever and in front of anyone. folding her arms across her chest with unwavering confidence and raising her eyebrows slightly. She asked the wolf directly and decisively if he truly wanted her to throw him out of her life and her home without hesitation, leaving no chance for forgiveness or explanation. Suddenly, a childish, gentle hand carefully and delicately touched the animal's muzzle, trying to make it shut up immediately, because someone was quietly approaching them to visit, and silence became their main defense against possible unwanted witnesses and conversations that threatened to reveal the secret. The lady sternly and firmly ordered Sihael von Idris to immediately shut up and maintain complete silence, as there were rumors and footsteps nearby, behind the massive doors, that could easily be heard, which could lead to serious troubles and dangers for both of them at this tense moment. The maid and the knights ran quickly and without delay to the lady's room, loudly and anxiously calling her name, hurrying to report the approaching danger and demanding immediate action for protection and safety at this alarming and disturbing moment for everyone. Rosetta stood up in front, determined and proud, with the wolf standing confidently behind her, and the defeated mercenaries lay prostrate around her. She firmly stated that it was at this moment that she wanted to catch them and order the bodies removed without the slightest delay or hesitation. Marina rushed to her dear mistress, excitedly asking if everything was okay with her after such a tense and dangerous incident, to which Rosetta calmly and confidently replied that everything was under control and she felt fine despite everything. Watching her mistress with a frown, the maid noticed that a fresh and deep cut was clearly visible on the noblewoman's face, which urgently required urgent and thorough treatment in order to prevent the appearance of an unsightly scar, which could forever spoil her impeccable appearance. The maid insisted with trepidation and insistence that Rosetta was the Empire's true and precious asset, its genuine pride and bright hope, which deserved special attention, tender care, and all-consuming attention in any difficult situation. The handsome Sihael von Idris had a hard time holding back his suppressed laughter while in his mighty wolf form, and was almost spotted by a passing guard who could easily detect even the slightest suspicious movement in the night shadows. Sweet Rosetta, feeling a sudden embarrassment and slight confusion, blushed brightly, quickly turned away, trying to hide this feeling from prying eyes, but inside her a mixture of excitement, awkwardness, and an internal deep struggle with herself was splashing. Realizing that the wound on her face required immediate and careful care, the lady without hesitation allowed the maid to perform the gentle treatment, understanding that even the slightest scar could spoil her impeccable appearance and weaken her authority in front of others. While the night outside was deep and gloomy, the huge ball continued in the halls full of lights, and a single lantern softly illuminated the stone pavements, filling the air with mystery and anticipation of the coming fateful important events. The wolf figure sat calmly in front of its mistress, who lay on the bed, carefully asking her many questions that troubled his heart and mind, trying to understand the reasons for her fatigue and those complex thoughts that tormented her soul at that moment. She turned tiredly to her faithful white friend, and he instantly jumped up to her, anxiously asking what had happened and why she looked so exhausted, because his devotion and concern for her knew no bounds or time, and he was always there. With a heavy and sullen expression on her face and sternly pointing her finger at him, Rosetta firmly and decisively declared that Sihael von Idris was now her pet and her complete property, like a rare and precious gift, which she intended to look after with care and endless love. The lady insistently and persistently repeated that she cared for him sincerely and without any reservations, so now he belonged exclusively to her. But suddenly, overcome by the deepest fatigue, she softly collapsed onto the bed and fell fast asleep, allowing her body and soul to finally find the long-awaited and calm rest. A new day was slowly dawning, and the young and lovely Rosetta was still lying in bed, wrapped in a warm blanket, deeply immersed in sleep, while the soft light of dawn gently penetrated the room and created an atmosphere of comfort and great peace around her. The wolf sat quietly nearby, carefully watching the sleeping lady, while numerous rumors and conversations about her told a completely different story, filled with mysteries and contradictions that did not coincide with her real appearance. Everyone unanimously said that she was a ruthless tyrant, a cruel and merciless ruler, whose name caused fear and trembling in the hearts of people, and no one could forget those hard days when her harsh will and iron hand mercilessly ruled everyone around without the slightest indulgence. However, Rosetta turned out to be completely different. She sincerely and reverently promised Sihael von Idris that she would reliably protect him and give him a warm, sincere, and attentive attitude that he had not experienced for a long time, like a bright spark of hope in the dark and cold world around him. With deep interest and slight curiosity, Sihael von Idris, carefully observing the sleeping girl, reflected on what a mystery and secret she was for him, as if her enigmatic features invited him to reveal them step by step, revealing new and deeper facets of her soul and character. Suddenly, the mighty beast's attention was unexpectedly drawn to a soft pillow, neatly lying not far from him on the bed, as if inviting him to rest. But his determination and nobility did not allow him to prefer it, because he was a prince, and not just a beast. But instead of acting as expected and predicted, he suddenly decided to lie down next to the lady on the soft bed, like a royal prince with dignity and grandeur, and not like a simple dog that pounces on random passers-by without any reasoning or thought. Rosetta woke up from a weight that was pressing on her, as if a mighty and formidable wolf had lain down on top and was patiently waiting for her to wake up, like an ancient guardian protecting treasures, ready for the beginning of a new long day filled with mysteries and trials. It was early morning, and the clock had not yet struck 10 o'clock, when the soft light of dawn carefully penetrated the room, illuminating everything around with a warm and gentle light, promising a day full of new opportunities, hopes, and fresh, bright impressions. The girl, still tired and sleepy, tried to focus on the wolf, who was continuously making sounds similar to barking and growling, but their meaning remained incomprehensible to her, like a mysterious whisper of the wind, hiding the secrets of the past and the future at the same time. And yet, just recently, he spoke in clear and distinct words. But now again, only animal sounds came from his mouth, filled with rudeness and savagery, like a wild animal that had lost all semblance of human reason and control at the most inopportune moment. Suddenly, completely unexpectedly, the wolf bit her sharply on the hand, but immediately, as if realizing his impulse, began to carefully and tenderly lick the wound, trying to wash away the traces of his cruelty with his tongue, soft and warm, like the touch of a gentle breeze on a warm evening. Sitting on the bed, the girl screamed in surprise and fear, asking what this stupid and unpredictable wolf was doing, but he only silently continued to sit on top, not paying attention to her words and emotions, as if enchanted by some inner world and hidden thoughts. Contented and slightly relaxed, Sihael von Idris suddenly began to speak like a human again, explaining that everything happened thanks to her blood, and when he licked her hand, something seemed to click in his mind. He began to understand her thoughts, feelings, and even hidden intentions much more clearly. Upset and insulted, the beast turned away sharply in anger when he received an unexpected and sharp blow from the heroine for his bite, loudly calling the lady cruel and unfair, as if not wanting to admit his guilt and demonstrating pride even in moments of weakness and pain. After which the werewolf calmly and honestly explained that he had woken her up not with the intention of causing her any trouble, but simply because he was very hungry and wanted to eat, since the instincts of savages sometimes prevail over reason, even in the most unexpected and inappropriate moments. Then Sihael von Idris, with a slight and barely noticeable smile, admitted that he was just joking, and then licked and even bit her lightly, because her lips smelled nice and beckoned him, causing a strange but warm feeling that he could not fully explain in simple words. Rosetta looked at him sullenly and displeasedly, trying to understand if she could punish this impudent man for his perverted actions and unpredictable, strange behavior. But deep down, she was not yet sure whether it was worth allowing herself such gentleness and forgiveness. Folding her arms across her chest, she asked sternly and demandingly how she could now believe his words about how only after touching and tasting her blood he was able to speak to her like a human being. as if these mystical and mysterious changes had turned his entire inner world and consciousness upside down. After which she finally realized and understood with complete clarity that it was only when he gently and carefully licked her cheek that he was able to speak in human language, as if this trembling touch awakened a hidden magical power in him that radically changed his inner essence forever. Apparently, Rosetta herself also contained some strong and mysterious magical power hidden deep in her soul and heart, capable of awakening and influencing those around her, intertwining their destinies with invisible, subtle, and mysterious threads of mysticism, riddles, and unknown secrets that have yet to be revealed. Suddenly, a huge and frightening monster loomed over the Duchess, threateningly saying that it would be a shame if she ever forbade him from licking her blood, as if threatening to deprive him of his only source of strength and connection with her. The maiden tried to insist that the wolf was not just an animal, but also a man with reason and feelings, to which he responded with mockery and contempt. Did that bother her? Only his thirst and imperious nature, which did not give in to logic and mercy, were more important. The girl turned away, embarrassed and timid, with a slight smile and blushing cheeks, saying that she could give him blood in another way, but begged him not to slobber on her lips under any circumstances, because it was too intimate and awkward for her, despite all the unusualness of their situation and circumstances. This confession unexpectedly brought the wolf into deep despondency, because he really tried not to hurt her when he bit and was afraid that he could frighten or offend her with his clumsy behavior and animal instincts, which he could not always fully control. However, when Rosetta offered him some more of her blood, Sihael von Idris immediately beamed with genuine joy, completely losing his feigned and cold appearance, and the lady involuntarily felt a little stupid, realizing how easily she was able to touch his heart and soul with her action. Suddenly, the lady resolutely grabbed her sharp and shining blade from the table, squeezing the blade tightly in her hand, as if preparing for something important or wanting to show her strength and determination in this strange, tense, and mystical situation in which they found themselves. After which she very lightly and gently touched the sharp blade of the dagger with one finger, as if checking its coldness and readiness for action, not experiencing the slightest fear, but feeling a subtle connection with this cold metal object in her hands. Sihael von Idris, like an obedient and submissive animal, began to carefully, softly, and with extraordinary patience lick the drops of blood from her hand, showing deep respect for the lady, and as if realizing the importance and sacredness of this unusual act for their mysterious and difficult relationship. After this, the dagger was easily, almost imperceptibly thrown back onto the salt shaker, where it lay quietly, calmly, and serenely, like a forgotten and unnecessary object, but at the same time still reminded of the hidden danger and powerful force that could be called upon at any moment and awaken a formidable power. In this strange and mystical situation, only one person the lady knew could believe in the prince's bloody curse: her blood relative Leonard, a man with dark, slightly disheveled hair, dressed in a strict dark suit, with a silvery face that showed wisdom and the weight of fate. The wolf continued to lick the woman's fingers tenderly and patiently, carefully collecting drops of blood, as if feeding not only on physical strength, but also on a special deep connection that arose between them in this unusual and significant moment of trust and mutual understanding. Sihael von Idris confidently reassured the lady, promising that he would give her everything she wanted if she helped him in his important and mysterious business, arousing in her a sincere sense of responsibility and a special mission that would bind their destinies forever. Without thinking twice, the lady turned away and confidently walked forward across the room, declaring in a firm and decisive voice that she was ready to become his loyal and devoted friend right now, carrying with her the readiness to support and protect him in everything without exception, no matter what. She sat down at the table and began to carefully write a letter to her blood relative, telling in detail about the mysterious and cursed prince, his current situation, and giving valuable instructions on what to do next to help and protect their common interests and destiny with full dedication. Her hand with the pen froze in the air above the letter. Old books were scattered nearby, and in this quiet moment she felt a little sorry for the wolf, such a devoted, lonely, and at the same time mysterious creature, which was so tenderly connected with her fate and deep experiences. The prince stood behind her in a strict and elegant uniform, watching carefully as she walked slowly around the work table and the ancient globe, as if weighing each of her decisions and carefully considering the coming steps, filled with secrets and important changes in their destiny. Suddenly, childish, timid hands suddenly grabbed his paw and carefully began to lift it up into the air, causing unexpected surprise and a light, warm excitement in everyone present, as if this gentle gesture meant the beginning of something new and very important in their strange and confusing story. With a smile on her lips, young Rosetta said that what was needed for her case was the prince's seal, and in this case this seal was represented by his paw, a symbol of strength, loyalty, and the mysterious connection between them, which gave the document special significance and weight. A large seal in the shape of an animal's paw was carefully placed on the document, leaving a clear and deep imprint that immediately gave the document undeniable strength and authority, as if the prince himself, by his presence, confirmed the importance of what was said and signed. Sihail von Idris agreed that such a signature did indeed look unusual, but that was precisely why it was absolutely authentic and complete, because its uniqueness spoke of real trust and a strong connection between them that could not be forged or disputed. Rosetta asked the prince not to call her by name anymore, because now they were like in the same boat, connected by common goals and destiny, which meant that they had to act together, supporting each other in any trials and difficulties that were yet to come. A woman's gentle hand met a strong but warm paw in a firm handshake, symbolizing a concluded agreement and mutual commitment, as if two completely different worlds, human and animal, found a common language and agreement for a joint path ahead. The girl confidently squeezed the letter from the butler's hands and sternly but politely told him that it should be delivered to her blood relative without the slightest delay or hindrance, because this message contained extremely important and fateful information on which the future lives of many depended. When the butler hesitated and felt a little awkward, she, without losing her composure and remaining resolute, noticed a shadow of excitement on his face and a deep wound that he tried to hide in every possible way, and asked what exactly had happened, causing him slight embarrassment. She felt really awkward and anxious when she learned that her brother had been rioting and causing trouble all night, and it was because of this chaos that she had been injured, which added heaviness, anxiety, and deep worries in her heart for his fate and her own situation. After which the servant, with a slight smile and noticeable enthusiasm, announced that they had finally received a multitude of high-quality and rare medicines, which this time promised to be especially effective and quickly get anyone back on their feet, even after serious injuries. Beaming with joy and almost exulting, the butler said with genuine enthusiasm that he would personally bring her the best of these medicines every day so that she could recover as quickly as possible, regain her strength, and shine again with her bright, unbending spirit. Rosetta walked along the paved road, lost in her own thoughts, and could not understand in any way. If her brother was so worried about her health, and even raged all night, then why had he never come to visit her in person? Before her stood a majestic, enormous fortress built of rough gray stone, her family mansion, which at the same time resembled an impregnable fortress and a prison, where every wall kept the memories, unsaid details, and secrets of her difficult family. The knights, exhausted after an extremely hard and grueling training session that lasted for many hours, lay powerless on the cool stone floor of the training yard, breathing with difficulty, as if all the strength and endurance had been completely driven out of their bodies. Tall Renoa, looking no less tired and worn out, sat on some old, cracked boxes in the corner, leaning his elbows wearily on his knees, with his sword by his side, as if it were the last support of his tired spirit, representing discipline, duty, and loyalty. The lady approached her dear brother slowly, almost silently, with notes of anxiety and restrained reproach in her heart, and in order to attract his attention to herself, carefully placed her warm hand on his shoulder, trying to convey a silent question and awaken the brotherly bond between them. After all that had happened, with great effort holding back the storm of excitement in her soul, she quietly, but with obvious resentment and a barely noticeable tremor in her voice, as if most of her pain was hidden behind these words, asked why he had not come personally and visited her if he was really so deeply worried about her fate. With his head down in frustration and hopelessness, Renoa sighed deeply and declared that the entire current situation had turned into an absolute mess, complete chaos and instability, in which it was no longer possible to act sensibly or count on order. He chuckled in irritation, looking up heavily, and at the same time he looked upset, tired, and clearly seriously dissatisfied with something, as if each new day brought more and more pressure, and each morning began with impossible tasks and difficult decisions. As soon as his voice rang out in the training hall with the order to rise and immediately continue training, the knights, who had been lying exhausted until then, quickly rose up as if in alarm, realizing that they had no choice but to obey the will of the commander. Rosetta, with a slight pang of misunderstanding, surprise, and heartfelt anxiety in her voice, turned to her strict and silent brother, asking why he so mercilessly and persistently drove his subordinates, forcing them to train to exhaustion and pain. Hiding his tired and tense face in his hands, young Renoa explained with a dull pain in his voice that on that tragic and dangerous day when his younger sister Rosetta was attacked by cruel and merciless killers, his knights acted too slowly and hesitantly. Above their heads stretched a high, clear blue sky with soft, scattered clouds floating on the gentle breeze, creating a strange contrast to the anxiety in their hearts as the brother and sister discussed their fate and vulnerability to future dangers. Having heard from Rosetta the details of the mysterious wolf's condition, Renoa came to the final conclusion, with restraint but confidence, that this beast, despite its wild and frightening nature, was more reliable, stronger, more responsive and more loyal than most people, and could perhaps be the best defense. After a short pause, without hiding his inner tension, he finally raised his head, looked his sister straight in the eyes, and, with firm, unbending determination and brotherly anxiety in his voice, said that from today on she would be under constant, strict, and unquestionable supervision. Hearing such a bold proposal, the noble lady, accustomed to relying on impeccable intuition and innate pride, smiled coldly and, suppressing a slight tremor of indignation, firmly, without a shadow of a doubt, declared that she did not want anything like that at all. Meanwhile, the man, driven by the desire to foresee the worst outcome and to protect the fragile, barely holding order of things in this shaky world, did not give in one iota, and, with insistent pressure in his voice, repeated that such a bold and sudden attack could inevitably be followed by another. The unwavering Renoa, whose attention to the smallest details bordered on obsession and subtle intuition, pointed to the thin but painfully scarlet wound that cut across the lady's tender and vulnerable lip, and with icy, piercing curiosity asked what kind of merciless and cruel creature dared to inflict such a shameful and humiliating injury on her. Rosetta waved it off with a light and indifferent movement of her hand, saying that it was empty nonsense, but her brother, looking at her carefully and with caution, did not believe her words for a second, feeling a deep anxiety and feeling that the truth was hidden somewhere much deeper. Clutching her ears with her hands, as if trying to drown out the hum of her thoughts and the tension within her, she screamed, finally realizing and fully understanding her brother's words when he began to list in detail and thoroughly everything that was wrong with her and why she should not ignore it under any circumstances. The sad and depressed lady lowered her head, as if losing her last vital forces and all hope, and the brother, with a satisfied and almost triumphant smile, settled down comfortably, sitting on a wooden box, thereby proving his unconditional rightness and confidence in what he said. Now, a knight with a long sword constantly and relentlessly followed her like the most faithful and devoted guard, ready at any moment to enter into a fierce battle to protect and guard her from possible dangerous threats and ill-wishers. When they finally reached her small but cozy room with tired steps, she tried to gently but persistently politely send him back, hoping that he would give in and leave, but he firmly and uncompromisingly refused, declaring that he would now always be by her side to protect, defend, and support her. Rosetta, gathering all her willpower and confidence, resolutely gave a strict order for the man to remain in the next, slightly darkened room and not disturb her peace, adding that if she suddenly needed help or support, she would definitely call him, and he would have to come immediately. The knight, standing motionless like a stone statue and trembling faintly from inner confusion, anxiety, and uncertainty, did not know what to do next because the situation was completely new to him, unpredictable, and caused a painful internal conflict between duty and fear. The lady had no choice but to decisively and coldly paint a menacing, cold, and unwavering expression on her face, directed at him, to show that she would no longer tolerate any violations of personal space and expected complete respect and discipline from him. The man immediately said sharply and confidently that he finally understood everything, his face twisted into a painful and tormented grimace, as if a boa constrictor had squeezed him in a merciless and crushing embrace, after which, without waiting for an answer and without turning around, he silently walked away, leaving behind an oppressive and heavy silence. The Japanese hand carefully and barely noticeably grabbed the cold door handle, smoothly and almost silently opening that door, as if afraid to wake up the whole house with its light and uncertain creak, in order to quietly and carefully check what was actually happening inside the room. There, in a slightly darkened and cozy room, a wolf was already sitting calmly on the bed, a faithful, devoted, and taciturn inhabitant of her spiritual world, waiting for her with patience, steadfastness, and genuine care, like a symbol of constant protection and quiet strength next to her. Suddenly, the werewolf spoke softly and encouragingly, almost affectionately, claiming that the rumors about her were false, slanderous, and unfair, that in fact she was very kind to others and always considerate of the knight, not driving him away immediately, but trying to politely and delicately ask him to leave. Rosetta deftly and skillfully changed the subject of the conversation to a completely different topic, distracting the wolf and smiling slightly, noticing the carefully applied bandage tied to his fresh and painful wound, and with lively interest asked if this bandage caused him any discomfort, to which he briefly and confidently replied that it did not. Why did the lady herself slowly and carefully reach for the bandage, as if intuitively feeling and understanding that right now she should take care of her faithful and devoted companion, who so needed her tenderness, care, and attention at this difficult and delicate moment? Gently and tenderly, looking at the werewolf with her deep, warm eyes, she smiled softly at him, thinking of him with great warmth and sincere concern, trying with her attention and care to give him at least a little comfort, peace, and peace of mind. With a sigh of relief mixed with a little sadness, she patiently explained that she had always greatly appreciated his loyalty, devotion, and sincere support, and she gently said this directly to him, causing the wolf to suddenly awaken feelings and a feeling of real deep closeness between them. Warm and caring female hands began to carefully and skillfully wrap the bandage around his paw, trying to do it as carefully and delicately as possible to ease his pain and prevent further irritation, because each of her gentle gestures was filled with sincere love, warmth, and care. Suddenly, looking closely, she unexpectedly noticed that the wound on the wolf's paw was completely healed. The skin was smooth, without a single trace of damage, and everything seemed to be in perfect order with him, as if everything had healed by itself, without a trace of pain or blood. Surprised and a little thoughtful, she asked the wolf if this was a manifestation of some special healing ability of his, to which he replied with slight sadness that he would like to possess such a gifting power, but alas, fate did not gift him with this rare talent and wonderful gift of nature. Perhaps, she thought, it was her blood that played a role in this miraculous healing, when the wolf casually licked that scarlet and warm liquid from her fingers, as if gently accepting part of her life force and energy, which helped to restore the wound quickly and painlessly. But how was it possible, she wondered, that the power of a healer had suddenly appeared in the novel's main villain, and not in the main heroine, to whom this ability would seem to be much more necessary and natural, forcing her to think deeply about this strange and mysterious turn of fate. They continued their leisurely conversation, gradually coming to the conclusion that her magic acted exclusively on him, the wolf, but did not manifest itself or affect the people around them in any way, as if their bodies were an inaccessible barrier and protection from her mysterious powers. A deep, almost unbreakable bond developed between her and her faithful wolf, an invisible thread of trust and mutual understanding that connected their souls and hearts, allowing them to feel each other even at great distances and in the most difficult moments. Suddenly, the wolf, with genuine interest and noticeable anxiety in his voice, asked if everything was really all right with the lady, because from her tired appearance and barely concealed quiet sadness, he immediately understood that she was worried, was depressed, and was clearly not in the best mood, which caused him deep concern. Extending her hands softly and warmly towards him, she calmly said that she was fine, that she was tired but strong, and that he should not worry in vain, because next to him she always felt safe and confident, capable of overcoming any difficulties. She gently and affectionately ran her hand through the thick fur of the large wolf, softly touching his head with warm fingers, as if trying to convey the full depth of her care, warmth, and sincere support through this simple but filled with feelings and kindness gesture. Suddenly the monster, slightly embarrassed and unexpectedly touched by her kind and warm actions, recoiled a little from her, lowering his head and blushing, as if for the first time feeling something new in himself. Tenderness and trust, which confused and at the same time touched his soul. She asked him, worriedly and slightly sternly, but at the same time with softness in her voice, not to do that again, to which he calmly and confidently replied that she could do whatever she wanted with him. After all, his devotion, love, and trust were boundless and sincere. Rosetta smiled, answering with a slight playfulness, tenderness, and warmth that he was very beautiful, which is why she liked to stroke him so much, finding in this simple touch a source of real comfort, support, and warmth. The werewolf stepped back, embarrassed and a little awkward, feeling like for the first time in his life he had been given such a sincere, unexpected, and touching compliment, which made his heart beat faster and caused a slight, barely noticeable blush on his cheeks. The night around them was especially big, dark, and mysterious, enveloping them in its silent, thick mystery and creating an atmosphere in which it seemed as if time had slowed down, allowing them to be alone with themselves, with each other, and with their most secret thoughts. The lady sat in the silence of the spacious Kremlin hall, thoughtfully reflecting on her faithful pet, who gradually began to treat her not just as a mistress, but as a true friend, sharing with her both joys and sorrows, and becoming a reliable support in her life. The Baron, having learned of the brazen attack on the noblewoman, was deeply indignant, not hiding his anger and indignation, and wondered who dared to raise a hand against such a noble and respected lady, thereby violating all norms of honor and decency. Placing his hand on his chest with a feeling of pride and determination, the aristocrat solemnly promised to avenge the honor and protect the dignity of his lady, punishing everyone who dared to hurt or offend her, thereby showing his devotion and strength of spirit. Rosetta, noticing his excitement, calmly and with a slight smile asked the aristocrat to calm down, not to worry so much about her and to believe that she would cope with all the difficulties on her own, without unnecessary worries and anxieties on his part. A majestic and graceful wolf sat next to the lady, attentively listening to every sound and participating in the conversation, comfortably settled at the feet of his mistress, as if sharing every moment with her and feeling her mood without words and explanations, giving her a feeling of calm and protection. The knight, appointed as a bailiff for her protection and safety, was now constantly nearby, watching her every move, and this began to strain the lady, causing her a slight feeling of discomfort, anxiety, and a desire for a little freedom to feel independent and free. Rosetta, opening her graceful and elegant umbrella, firmly and decisively expressed her wish that today she would like to walk only in the company of her faithful pet, the mighty wolf, and in no case to accept any other accompaniment, thus emphasizing her independence. Pointing her finger to a cozy and shady place under a spreading old tree, she firmly and categorically ordered the guards to wait for her there, under this green tent of foliage, where she intended to spend time in peace and solitude, away from the bustle and extra eyes of curious people. The man tried to gently and persistently persuade her to go with him, to share the path and not to remain completely alone. But Rosetta remained adamant, firmly standing her ground and not wanting to retreat a single step from her decision, showing a strong character and iron determination. Happily waving his hand, the guy humbly agreed to wait for her by the tree, laughing to himself at his naivety, stupidity, and youthful spontaneity, realizing that in this harsh world it is not so easy to convince a strong-willed and independent lady with such a strong character and spirit. Sihael von Idris, confident and calm, walked next to her, offering his companion for greater safety and convenience to also equate her faithful knight. But Rosetta, with a slight smile and a soft smile, answered that he himself was quite enough for her, and she did not want additional protection now. A leisurely and warm conversation ensued between them, during which the stubborn and determined werewolf, firmly and with fire in his eyes, declared that he was not at all the fierce and cruel type that those around him were accustomed to seeing him as, wanting to sincerely dispel all the stereotypes and misunderstandings imposed by the world. Rosetta, touched by his sincere and profound words, gently and affectionately stroked his head, conveying through this tender and warm gesture all her support, trust, and sincere warmth that she felt for her unusual and faithful companion and true friend. After Rosetta slightly bowed her head, she calmly and confidently announced that Leonard would be coming to them today for an important visit that could significantly change many things in their lives and bring new, unexpected events into the usual course of their days. The big wolf slowly and attentively raised his head when the maiden tenderly and carefully approached him with an offer to bathe and refresh himself before the arrival of the expected guest, understanding that careful preparation for the visit requires cleanliness and order in everything. The animal, obedient and a little reluctant, sat in the water, bathed and washed itself, feeling the coolness and softness of the streams that washed away fatigue, dirt, and accumulated dust, although internally it remained a little sad and did not particularly enjoy the process itself. Rosetta sat quietly and attentively nearby, carefully and patiently washing the wolf, trying to cheer him up because he had fallen into despondency and did not want to wash at all. But her gentle touches, soft voice, and calm energy gradually restored his cheerfulness and trust. The lady felt strong irritation and deep indignation towards her friend, who, laughing and making fun of her with malice, played the role of an unfortunate victim, supposedly forced to wash against her will, which only further increased her anger and inner displeasure. And so Rosetta decided to keep up and also make a little fun of the prince, asking with a slight grin and a playful squint whether he was really so innocent and had never touched anyone, hinting at his possible secret misdeeds and causing a slight challenge to his pride. This unexpected question angered the heir to the empire to the depths of his soul, and, unable to contain himself, he roared in anger, loudly screaming how dare she speak like that about him, about a man of his status and honor, which caused tension in the air and attracted the attention of those around him. Sitting in the water, he furiously shouted at the lady that it was impossible to speak so simply and thoughtlessly about such a dispute without having a drop of shame, because such words could hurt and insult the honor of any noble person, especially the heir to the throne, which was completely unacceptable. Covering her face with her hand in slight embarrassment, the girl continued to joke with a smile and a playful tone that she could find a suitable female for him if he really wanted it, adding a touch of lightness to the conversation and daring the prince to give a cheerful answer. Sihael von Idris, clearly irritated by her behavior and complete lack of shame, growled sharply in her direction with notes of irritation and reproach, expressing his displeasure. But the lady did not try to hide it at all, and only laughed loudly and sincerely in response, demonstrating her ease and spontaneity. Taking a small basin of cool water in her hands, she, with a playful mood and slight mockery, tipped it right onto the monster, causing an unexpected reaction and slight panic in the wolf, as if provoking him to respond with a humorous answer. After that, she quickly and confidently grabbed a soft towel, shook off excess moisture from it, and carefully dried the wolf, simultaneously announcing that their water procedures were finally complete, and now they could move on to the next stage of their rest and communication. Not wanting to wait for someone to hand her a towel, Sihael von Idris began to shake his thick fur vigorously, rubbing off excess moisture and trying to quickly feel relief after the bath so that he could return to his daily affairs and duties as quickly as possible. As a result, the noblewoman was also completely soaked to the skin, and she had to carefully pat her head with a soft towel, trying to dry the drops of water slowly flowing down her face and hair, like a gentle reminder of the refreshing water procedures she had just undergone. An awkward, slightly languid and almost tangible silence hung between her and the wolf as they sat next to each other by the warm bath, feeling a quiet but deep connection, and at the same time feeling a little awkward from the recent events, as if both of them didn't know how best to express their feelings and thoughts. Suddenly, Sihael von Idris raised his head sharply and warily, as if trying to hear something important in the distance, and, answering the noblewoman's question about his condition, explained that there were too many fonts and water around, which clearly bothered him and did not allow him to relax, causing internal unrest. At that most unexpected moment, the door opened slowly and treacherously with a quiet but sharp creak, disturbing the peace and introducing a new wave of tension and uncertainty into the atmosphere of the room, forcing both of them to instantly turn their close attention to it. The lady was shivering all over from the piercing cold because she was soaking wet, and the coolness freely penetrated under her thin dress, causing a slight tremor throughout her entire body and increasing the feeling of vulnerability at this difficult moment, forcing her to barely restrain the trembling and cold. Suddenly the maiden turned around sharply, and with a slight hope in her eyes saw that Leonardo was standing next to her, the very one she had been waiting for a long time and sincerely wanted to see as a guest, her older brother, whose sudden arrival filled her heart with warmth and relief, as if it had brought salvation from all worries and fears. He was her older brother, a real handsome man with perfect facial features as if carved from silver, with thin, graceful lines and shining skin, which gave him extraordinary charm and distinguished him from others with his refined beauty. Suddenly, behind the older man, a younger relative unexpectedly appeared, sleepy, unkempt, and walking slowly, as if he had just woken up and was not ready for the upcoming important meeting, with disheveled hair and a tired, slightly confused look. Renoa frowned, clearly confused and slightly annoyed that Rosetta was still playing in the water, despite being completely soaked, as if not understanding why she needed to do so in such a cold state. When a comment was made that even the lady's underwear was soaking wet, the young man suddenly received an unexpected and painful slap from his older brother, after which he began to scream and squeal, demonstrating a mixture of pain, confusion, protest, and a sense of injustice. The sweet lady suddenly realized that young Renoa was absolutely right. She really was soaking wet. Even her underwear was soaking wet, which made her feel slightly embarrassed and at the same time irritated, increasing the feeling of discomfort and anxiety. When the noblewoman asked the werewolf if he had seen any wet footprints, he became noticeably embarrassed, quickly turned away and quietly answered negatively with obvious uncertainty, although it was clear to everyone that he was simply lying, trying with all his might to hide the truth and avoid questions. Renoa stood there in complete amazement, as if time had suddenly stopped, when his gaze accidentally fell on a strange scene where his own sister was talking to a real monster, and the monster, like a living creature, calmly and confidently answered her, causing him incredible shock and fear. With great surprise and obvious bewilderment, he asked his sister again if he was really sleeping, since it seemed strange and incredible to him that his faithful dog had suddenly begun to talk to her, like a living fantasy or a miracle that was hard to believe even in reality in this world. In the end, the whole truth was unexpectedly and completely revealed. It turned out that the wolf was not just an animal at all, but an escaped prince hiding in the body of this animal, whose appearance was only a mask to conceal his true essence and difficult fate, which no one even suspected. Renoa stood in complete shock, as if paralyzed, unable to move or utter a single word, which seemed to be stuck deep in his throat, leaving him immersed in silent amazement and deep inner shock. When Renoa finally came to his senses, after such an unexpected and shocking revelation, he called the prince a real scoundrel with obvious irritation and bitterness in his voice, realizing the complexity and duplicity of the situation that suddenly unfolded before his eyes. He was in his sister's quiet room, slowly walking around her bed, covered with a bright, deep red blanket, as if trying to collect his thoughts or find some answer to his anxious and confused feelings in this quiet space. The guy very carefully picked up the edge of the soft, delicate fabric with his hand and smoothly, almost carefully, lifted it up, as if afraid to disturb the fragile, almost sacred silence and deep peace that reigned in this cozy place, filled with warm memories and quiet hopes. The blanket rose lightly and almost weightlessly into the air, as if caught by a light breath of spring wind, creating an effect of lightness and freedom that contrasted sharply with the heaviness of the thoughts swarming in his head at this very important and tense moment. After that, he carefully and tenderly wrapped his little sister in a clean sheet, quietly and with slight anxiety, saying that she was in a completely unattractive and bad shape, causing both deep concern and barely concealed irritation. Irritably and with obvious impatience, he reminded the girl that he had already told her many times before that all the men in this cruel world were wolves, and she, as usual, with obvious displeasure, replied that it was he himself who had once given her this very wolf, as if justifying his own actions. The older brother quickly and decisively separated his younger brothers, firmly and loudly ordering his brother to calm down and pull himself together, and his sister to immediately go upstairs to change and tidy herself up, because the situation required decisive, quick, and thoughtful actions without delay. When suddenly Rosetta turned to the man with a slight alarm in her voice and asked him to carefully dry her pet's fur, warning that otherwise he would definitely get sick and could be seriously injured, which caused Leonardo some surprise and inner doubt. Leonard, although reluctantly, still agreed to help, casting a furtive, cold, disapproving glance at the arrogant and haughty behavior of the wolf himself, who seemed to expect special treatment and respect from everyone without the slightest respect for those around him. Meanwhile, the lady was already dressed in an exquisite and rich purple dress, which perfectly emphasized her slender figure, and on her feet sparkled elegant and neat black shoes with thin and high heels, giving her image a special sophistication and mysterious appeal. Politely and with slight excitement, carefully weighing her words before entering, the noblewoman carefully and quietly knocked on the door, trying not to disturb the fragile silence and to show due respect to the owner, unaware of what unexpected worries and trials awaited her inside. There she was met by Renoa, who for some reason looked unusually pale and exhausted, as if he had suffered greatly, which immediately frightened and greatly alarmed the girl, causing her anxiety. What could have happened there, and why did he look as if he had experienced something terrible and scary? Soon the two of them began to argue heatedly, quarreling and disagreeing over whether to tell the prince the whole truth about how he ended up here, because it was too dangerous and could lead to the most undesirable and unpredictable consequences for everyone around. Renoa was clearly deeply frightened and shocked by the truth itself, which was revealed to him like a cold blade. The wolf he had stolen and once secretly given to his sister was not just a beast, but a real prince who was a werewolf, a secret that made his heart clench with fear. At the same time, Leonardo carefully and patiently fulfilled his sister's request, perfectly drying the wolf's fur, while carefully combing it so that the pet looked well-groomed and felt comfortable, like a caring owner, paying tribute to every movement. As a result, Sihael von Idris was carefully and tenderly washed, and his clean, soft, snow-white fur sparkled beautifully and shone brightly in the light, like the pride of the owner and a living symbol of sincere care, surrounding the animal with a special aura of grandeur and impeccable grooming. To the lady's playful and slightly mocking question whether her brother had taken care of the pet, Leonardo replied that it was simply unbearably difficult to cope with such a fidget, but despite all the difficulties and whims of the animal, he successfully coped with the task. Embarrassed by the unexpected, sincere compliment, Leonardo coughed slightly, looking away, and with a slight timid smile admitted that perhaps they really should get together and talk calmly, without rushing, in order to better understand each other and share their experiences. On one of the soft sofas in the luxurious living room, Rosetta and her faithful pet were comfortably seated, and opposite, on another sofa, sat two brothers, carefully observing what was happening around them and assessing the situation with different moods and emotions. For some reason, Renoa looked angry and clearly dissatisfied, frowning his thick eyebrows and tightly folding his arms across his chest, as if he was trying to hide his deep, painful experiences and internal, painful doubts that had been haunting him and disturbing his soul from within for a long time. The noblewoman, watching his reaction closely, asked the prince with a slight worry in her voice if he was afraid that her younger brother now also knew that he was actually a prince trapped in the body of a wolf, to which he calmly replied that everything was fine and he completely trusted her family and their support. Renoa was about to say that he shouldn't have believed these words, but suddenly he received a light slap on the head from Leonardo, who persistently asked the heir to the empire to explain in detail how exactly this happened, and how he received such a strange and unexpected ability. The brothers listened with obvious interest and deep intrigue when the heir told how, supposedly, at the moment when the beast drank the blood of the Duchess, reason and intelligence gradually returned to him, awakening from the bestial darkness and chaos hidden deep within. Half believing this unusual story, the brothers fell silent, clearly dissatisfied and greatly embarrassed by the fact that their sister was the source of blood for this mysterious creature, and now they felt anxiety, uneasiness, and inner tension. Rosetta also sat quietly, silently closing her eyes, not knowing what exactly to say in this difficult, confusing, and tense situation, as if trying to collect all the scattered thoughts and find the right words among the raging emotions, worries, and deep, painful doubts in her heart. Suddenly, she slowly raised her graceful hand and pointed a confident finger at her closest relatives, saying with determination that she had long wanted to check whether this strange and mysterious experiment would really work on people, because it could open up completely new horizons. After that, with a sweet, slightly playful and charming smile on her lips, she asked with a slight mockery which of the brothers was ready to voluntarily become her experimental subject, ready to bravely go through all the tests for the sake of science, for the sake of knowledge, and for the common good of the family. Renoa jerked back, pressing both hands to his chest, and screamed loudly that he definitely did not want to drink her blood, experiencing real horror and inner despair at the very thought of this terrible, painful, and unjust act, which seemed unbearable to him. But Leonardo, on the contrary, calmly and decisively agreed with what was happening and prepared a sharp dagger, carefully and thoroughly wiping it with a clean white handkerchief, as if preparing for something important, inevitable, and fateful that required his full attention and concentration. After that, noticing that there was fresh scarlet blood left on his hand, Rosetta involuntarily winced, seeing this red mark, not hiding the slight embarrassment, anxiety, and deep inner excitement that instantly ran across her face, betraying the most sincere and real feelings. Politely, and with a slight, benevolent smile, the brother handed his sister a sharp dagger, inviting her to hold it tightly in her hands, as if it were a symbol of unconditional trust, shared responsibility, and the upcoming fateful task that would forever bind their destinies and hearts together. The lady also suddenly began to bleed thinly from her hand, and to the loud cry of the younger Renoa, she calmly and confidently replied that this was exactly what needed to be done, because it was an important ancient ritual that required mutual participation, complete trust, and sincere faith between them. Finally, they carefully and gently mixed their drops of blood, combining them in one fragile container, and poured the resulting thick scarlet liquid into an elegant crystal goblet, thus symbolizing the unbreakable union and the unbreakable bond that now connected them. Leonardo took this glass with a deep, rich scarlet liquid in his hands and restrainedly took a small sip, as if confirming his complete readiness to accept responsibility, fate, and active participation in the common cause that they all had to go through together. Everyone suddenly fell silent, holding their breath and watching with tense anticipation to see if anything would happen to the man, the older brother, in this anxiety-filled room, where even the silence seemed echoing and oppressive, like a harbinger of something significant and strange. Finally, sighing after a long and awkward pause, Leonardo stated in a measured tone that, apparently, her blood was completely useless for human nature and did not have any noticeable magical effect, contrary to their hopes and expectations. Upset and slightly disappointed, Rosetta approached her pet and allowed him to lick the remaining drops of blood from her palm, which immediately angered Renoa, who flushed with indignation, but the girl calmly replied that since the blood had already been spilled, it should not be wasted. Leonardo waved his hand, tiredly but confidently suggested that they try to remove the poison from the body soon, the same one that the empress had previously used for her insidious purposes, to subjugate the will and break the spirit of those who dared to oppose her. A girl with light, almost silver hair, in a loose white shirt and short stature, who seemed almost fragile, but whose eyes shone with intelligence and determination, took a step forward as if ready to offer help or learn more about the plan. Her shoes, patent leather and dark cherry in color, with delicate patterns on the straps, clicked softly on the smooth marble floor as she approached the center of the room, marking the beginning of the next act, which could forever change not only their fate, but also set new accents. The girl with expressive red eyes, a light tail behind her back, and delicate, almost fragile features that exuded a special sophistication and calm strength, calmly introduced herself to those present as Nanabi Terran, the only sorceress in the elite division of mages.